Life during a zombie apocalypse demands resilience, strength, and a bit of luck. After all, you could run into the dead anywhere. Every encounter with them could be your last, so a person needs to be ready. The mutants were incredibly strong and fast. Plus, they reacted to sounds and could smell you. The main character had been an experienced soldier in the past, so he prepared himself for a meeting with the monsters. He took down anyone who crossed his path. It was just part of the job. He had to risk his own life, but that was the only way to find the precious supplies necessary for survival. Moving on foot was extremely dangerous, so he used a car he found on the street. But even that wasn't safe because the monsters had intelligence and could track their prey. He had special gear that was critical for his survival on the city streets. The man had to wear protective armor and try to move as little as possible on foot, which meant relying on transportation. There were so many zombies on the streets that any trip for supplies could be your last. To break through, he had to run over mutants with his car. There were really just so many of them. It was pure hell. An unprepared person would die immediately if they encountered the monsters in the middle of the street. His car was badly damaged. The windshield was shattered. However, he couldn't afford to stop. If his car stalled, he wouldn't have a chance of getting out alive. Suddenly, the broken glass couldn't hold, and one of the zombies tried to get into his car. The experienced man had risked his life more than once, so he slammed on the gas. For him, this was just another day. Things like this happened all the time, and every day he had to risk his life to survive. But this time, there were so many monsters that he couldn't break through. They managed to block and flip his car, and the man found himself in a deadly trap, with no chance of escape. The car became his living tomb, and gradually the zombies began to surround him and crawl inside. He couldn't die. He had to do everything possible to survive. It was terrifying. He screamed. Just a few months ago, he never suspected he would end up in such a critical situation. He had a wife and a daughter, and they lived their ordinary lives like everyone else. One morning, strange events unfolded. As there were a lot of people in military uniforms outside, an announcement came over the loudspeaker that martial law had been declared in the city to try to stop a new epidemic that was extremely dangerous for all humanity. People had to keep an eye on the main media outlets to stay informed about the spread of the epidemic and potential dangers. The main character's wife was very worried about the epidemic, especially since their daughter was so young. To calm his family, the man promised to try to change the situation and do everything possible to improve their dire circumstances. Even in this tough situation, he tried to joke. The news reported that the number of infected had risen to several thousand. From that day on, quarantine was imposed, as politicians believed it was necessary to try to slow the spread of the epidemic. There were rumors online that this was a zombie virus, and those infected would eventually turn into monsters. However, the professor didn't believe in this theory and dismissed everything related to it. The man also didn't believe that the infected could turn into zombies and thought it was just a way to scare people into staying home. The main task was to try to earn money and secure the necessary supplies for the duration of the quarantine. That morning, doctors were going house to house, taking a census and identifying the sick. Now they were supposed to bring food to all the living people every few days, and if anyone needed help, they could reach out. There were very few people on the streets, and to avoid danger, everyone stayed home. For the first time in many years, the main character allowed himself to sleep in, as he didn't have to get up early and go to work. The supplies brought by the doctors could last them for several weeks, so they didn't have to worry about money. His daughter wanted to go outside to play, but the father tried to explain that it was very dangerous. They couldn't take that risk. To distract her, he turned on the TV. The news reported that there had been no new cases of the unknown illness in the last 24 hours. This meant that they had managed to stop the epidemic, and people were overjoyed when they heard this. The last few days in the apartment had been very tough for them, but suddenly the lights went out. Checking the meter, he realized that some kind of disaster had occurred because his neighbors also lost power, and they didn't know what to do with themselves. Police on the streets tried to calm the angry crowd and announced that the outages were temporary and everything would be restored soon. Hearing this, people began to go outside as they had nothing to do in their apartments. The officer tried to stop them, but it didn't help. People were convinced that the epidemic was over and they were safe. Suddenly, a column of smoke was visible a few blocks from their building. It seemed the fire was very intense, and it was unclear what was really happening. To stop the people, the police were ready to use their weapons. Just then, they heard the sounds of explosions. Gunfire erupted just a few meters away. They could feel the noise and the sound of explosions getting louder and closer. It was unclear from which direction danger would come, and the man, trying to protect his family, forced them to go back inside the apartment. Suddenly, an unknown man appeared outside, running from something. Behind him was a massive horde of zombies, and seeing them, the police and the people on the street tried to flee. But they had no luck. The monsters were incredibly fast and showed no signs of fatigue. They caught up with the poor souls and quickly tore them to pieces. Despite the police trying to shoot them off, there were too many monsters and the bullets didn't stop them. They found themselves in a pack, doomed, with no chance of survival. The zombies tore into their flesh, inflicting unimaginable pain and suffering. After that, they began to climb buildings, killing innocent people in their path. Panic erupted in the city, as many civilians found themselves in grave danger, unable to leave their apartments. The man realized that danger was approaching. Now he had to do everything possible to protect his family. His daughter began to cry. She was terrified. They left the balcony. The father quickly started locking all the windows and doors. They needed to block any chance of the monsters getting inside. To ensure his daughter wouldn't hear the horrific screams of people and gunfire, he put headphones on her. The man tried to explain that it was just a game and everything wasn't real. Only after these words could his daughter calm down. She believed her father was telling the truth. After that, the man ran to the door to check if it was locked. But outside, he heard strange noises. It became clear that the monsters were nearby, and now they were in as much danger as everyone else. There were so many of them that they could easily break down the front door and get inside the house. At that moment, they began to smash the entrance door. The man panicked, realizing that if the monsters got inside, he wouldn't be able to stop them. He needed to call for help, as it was his only chance to save himself. However, in response, he heard that during the quarantine, calls were not allowed, and if they needed help, they would have to reach out another time. The man began to cry. He realized that they had been lied to all along. The situation was much worse, and there were many sick people. He couldn't give up, as the survival of his family depended solely on him. Water had also been shut off, leaving everyone in a very difficult position. The main character tried to check all the taps, hoping that at least one would yield a drop of water. But all his efforts were in vain. He quickly began gathering necessary supplies. It seemed he had come up with a new plan and was going to use an empty bucket. He started sealing the empty buckets to keep any remaining water from spilling out. These actions were critically necessary, as it was likely they wouldn't have water again. Moreover, he didn't stop trying to call for help, but he knew no one would answer. His wife began to cry. She had already said goodbye to life and believed they would perish. He promised her that they would survive and he would do everything possible to make it happen. It seemed she believed him, as she had no other choice. Neither of them could believe that this was really happening, as they hadn't even suspected how critical the situation was. It was clear that they would have to stay home for a long time, and the lack of water and food would become a serious problem for them. So they needed to count how many supplies they actually had left, and then they could plan everything and use them much more economically. Last time, they managed to buy a lot of baby cereal, so they had plenty of that. They also had a few kilograms of rice, beans, corn, 2 packs of pasta, and instant food. In the fridge, there were a few vegetables, some yogurt, and rice patties. They opened the fridge door to create condensation from which they could get water, because they had very little water left, and it was likely to run out soon. At first, they needed to eat the food that would spoil quickly. The other products had to last. But to cook food, they needed water, which was in very short supply. Now, people needed to come up with a way to prepare food, as they couldn't eat rice raw. Suddenly, the man remembered that they had 40 liters of water. It was inside the water heater, and that was what they could use. If they opened the valve, they could get precious water. So, after doing the math, they realized they actually had 50 liters of water, and now they could cook proper rice. At that moment, they began to rejoice, as hope had returned. Only then did they realize how much they loved each other and were grateful for the constant support and help. Soulless zombies continued to roam the streets. The screams of people trying to leave their homes in search of supplies and food were constantly heard. The only thing everyone dreamed of now was to survive and return to normal life. They went one after another, and some of them took desperate steps onto the street, ready to leave their apartments for the sake of survival. Parents did this for their children, but few of them managed to break through the massive horde of the dead. At that moment, a desperate man died. He died right before his son's eyes. More than anything, he wanted his son to survive, even though he would be left without a father. The boy understood that this was the end. He no longer had support or a friend. Days passed and the situation didn't change. After a while, his father also became infected. The boy could only watch with tears in his eyes, hoping it was all just a dream. But his father wasn't real. He had no heart and no emotions. He didn't even feel pain. When a bottle was thrown at his head, he didn't react. When the boy saw all of this, he felt sorry for his father and was terrified. The men who were his neighbors tried to entertain themselves and did everything possible for that. They continued to do this, not even realizing that zombies had once been living people. The poor boy tried to stop them, as he couldn't believe that his father was not real. He thought his father was in pain and tried to protect him. Because of his scream, a neighbor missed and wasted a precious bottle, which made him very angry. He felt very sorry and begged them not to touch the man with the briefcase, as that was his father. People tried to mock him, saying his father was a psychopath or a coward for leaving him alone in the apartment. The man's words deeply affected the boy, and he began to cry. They had no food left, and for the last few days, his father hadn't eaten anything, so he had to go out in search of supplies. Despite the difficult situation, people didn't want to share with him. They ignored the poor boy and planned to continue their business. Without thinking, the men threw bottles at the monsters and derived incredible pleasure from it. They found it amusing to watch as the creatures banged their heads against the wall, and the zombies began to get angry. They noticed the people throwing bottles at them and tried to find a way to get into their apartment. At this point, the people stopped and came up with another plan. They lowered a rope and tried to throw it over one of the zombies' heads. After that, they began to pull him. They were having so much fun that they didn't even think about the consequences of their antics. Because at a time when they were left without power and had to stay home, this was the only way to entertain themselves. It was very amusing to watch the creatures that couldn't reach them. But now the zombies had become much angrier. They started to build a pyramid, climbing on top of each other, trying to reach the people. Very soon they started climbing the walls of the house, and only then did people realize how wrong they had been. However, it was too late to change anything now. The zombies began breaking through the metal bars. There were so many of them that they quickly managed to do it. Now the people found themselves trapped, surrounded by monsters on all sides. They had no way to save themselves because the mutants had gotten inside their home. Everyone watched what was happening, and no one felt sorry for them because they were the ones to blame for what had happened. It was now clear that the metal bars were not a reliable defense against the monsters. The man was trying to gather the last drops of water. He did this so his daughter could drink. They were ready to do anything for their little girl, giving her all the water without taking a sip themselves. As they watched their daughter drink for the first time in days, they realized they were truly happy. Moreover, the father came up with another way to cheer up his child. He managed to turn off the phone, and now she could enjoy her favorite game. Together, they played, and even those moments were incredibly precious and joyful. The man had figured out a makeshift generator to charge the phone. However, it required a long time of cranking a handle, but that wasn't a big problem. The phone charged quickly, and they could use it. They also kept a close eye on their daughter as she slept, hoping she would wake up the next morning. They hadn't drunk water in a long time, but none of them wanted to. Their lips were dreamish and they looked terrible from lack of water, yet none of them wanted to drink. But they understood that this couldn't go on forever, and sooner or later they had to drink some water. So they agreed to do it right now to avoid putting their bodies in danger. They each drank a glass of water. Immediately they felt much better because it was their first sip in days. Now water had a completely different meaning for them. They had never thought before that it was such a precious resource. The woman began to feel sad again, knowing that sooner or later their supplies would run out and they would have to leave their home to survive. However, she quickly calmed down. She didn't want her husband to see her in such a state. The man smiled. He was glad that even in such a situation his wife wasn't getting upset. They tried to joke around, as it was the only way they could comfort themselves. Suddenly they heard a strange sound. It was coming from the balcony, so they needed to check what was really happening. Carefully opening the window, they saw a strange note lying in the middle of the balcony. The man cautiously approached it and picked up the paper. It was a note from their neighbor who lived across from them. His child had a fever, and he needed to find medicine, so he was trying to ask for help from other concerned people. The man couldn't refuse him, believing that he truly needed help. Now they needed to figure out a way to get him the medicine. For this, he planned to use a rope, as throwing it would be too risky. He tied one end of the rope to the box and wanted to hold the other end in case he needed to pull it back. And when everything was ready, he threw it. First, they needed to try to connect the rope between their homes. It worked, and they managed to connect the rope between their apartments. Now they could tie the medicine and safely pass it to each other. That's exactly what they did after a while. The man had all the necessary supplies. He wanted to thank them for their help, so in return, he sent them a package. It was water, which was critically necessary for survival. Along with it, he sent a note thanking them for their assistance. Everyone was satisfied because it was a very beneficial exchange. Very quickly, some people also began using ropes to exchange essential items. But there wasn't enough food and water for everyone, and tough times began. The man hadn't drunk water since then and continued to endure despite feeling very bad. He needed to find a way to get more water. He turned his attention to the air conditioner, hoping it might contain some condensate that could help him. He needed to manually get the motor inside the unit to roll, which would allow him to collect precious water. So he started taking apart the air conditioner. He felt so weak that he couldn't focus or concentrate. However, he knew well what he needed to do and tried to find the compressor. Unfortunately, it was sealed, and it wasn't as easy to access as he had initially thought. The man felt even worse because he had spent so much energy on this, and nothing was working. His eyes began to close, and it became clear he was losing consciousness. His wife came to his rescue. She saved him and gave him a little water to drink. Realizing this, he became very angry. He hadn't even realized how he had drunk too much water at once. Moreover, it was their last bottle, and there were no more supplies left. However, she believed there was no point in saving it, as he was dying, and without that water, she wouldn't have been able to save him. Suddenly, someone knocked on their front door. They were very scared because it seemed like it was people. In reality, it was a girl who somehow managed to reach their home. However, they were in no hurry to open the door and didn't want to let her in. She showed them a bag of food and water that she had managed to save and wanted to share with them because she couldn't get to their apartment earlier due to the huge number of zombies. The woman, overjoyed, wanted to open the door, but at the last moment, he stopped her, not allowing her to do so. He tried to calm her down and wanted her to be quiet and not make noise. She kept talking and tried to convince them that she had plenty of water and other resources, but the man replied that he wasn't going to open the door. After that, they saw the girl simply walk away. In fact, the woman couldn't understand her husband's behavior. However, it was hard to believe that someone could remain so kind in such a difficult situation. He was convinced that they were trying to trick them and come up with a way to get inside their house and rob them. Because of this situation, they were very upset, but they decided not to open the door for anyone anymore. Suddenly, they heard their neighbors' voices pleading for help. They quickly realized they had made the right decision because if they had opened the door, they would have ended up in the same situation. The same woman who had offered them help was now dragging a victim's body into her home. After that, the suspicious woman returned. She approached their door again and began threatening them with a knife. She promised to come back and take revenge. The main character tried to calm his wife and said that her words were a bluff and she was just trying to scare them. They continued to live as before, only giving their daughter the necessary amount of water needed for survival. As before, they didn't drink water, so their bodies were suffering greatly. However, this time she received less water than before. The girl wanted more, but now they needed to conserve the liquid. The father tried to explain that she needed to wait until water appeared in their apartment. Then she could drink as much as she wanted. The girl agreed to wait, knowing that her parents hadn't drunk anything at all. Suddenly, several gunshots and loud bangs rang out. The sounds were coming from the bathroom, and they quickly realized it was their neighbors trying to break through the wall separating their homes. It became clear that it was the woman who had threatened them, and she was trying to find any way to get into their apartment. The man wanted his wife to take the child away, but she wanted to stay and face her together with him to protect their home. But he couldn't allow her or their daughter to get hurt, especially since if she stayed, she would only distract him. However, she was worried about him and that he wouldn't manage alone. Moreover, their enemies were armed, so she left, leaving him alone. Meanwhile, the man began preparing for battle, gathering all the necessary equipment he would need to defend his home. He started getting ready to protect his body, placing a hard plate underneath his clothes. He also wrapped his hand in a thick layer of tape. After that, he began gathering other equipment and hid sharp weapons in his clothing. The hole in the wall became so large that he could see into the neighboring apartment. He was very nervous, but he continued to wait, not planning to back down. Then he took a desperate step. To stop the attackers, he used a gas canister and ignited a flame. He hoped this would deter them and show that he wouldn't give up easily, but it had no effect. His body was pierced by a sharp spear made by hand. Across from him, he saw a man who was his neighbor. He was smiling and promised to kill them to take all their supplies. He ran out of gas and could no longer hold it back, so he began climbing into his room. The main character realized he needed to try to attack first, but he didn't manage to do it and took a painful blow to the stomach. It hurt a lot, but he had to hold on for the sake of saving his family. He began to fight, ignoring the intense pain and bleeding, but the enemy managed to grab his hand and block his attack. Now they started wrestling with each other, and it all depended on physical strength. The main character took a desperate step and tried to strike with his head. It worked, as his opponent lost his balance and the man gained the upper hand. He ended up on top and tried to stab him with his own knife. For this, he pressed all his body weight onto him. But he didn't notice how the same woman who had threatened them came up behind him. Her face was burned as she had been injured by the flames. She was hungry, so despite her severe burns, she tried to stab him with the knife. But at the last moment, the hero managed to dodge her strike. Accidentally, she pierced her ally's arm, and he began to scream in intense pain. Then the main character struck again, aiming to kill her. Now the enemy had no allies left, and he was injured as well. The same fate awaited him. Everything was over, and the enemies were dead. After the fight, the man felt very weak. His wounds hurt, and he was exhausted. He sank to the ground to catch his breath. For the first time in his life, he had to kill a person. However, he couldn't relax, and right now he was going to check what was in their apartment. Water was the priority he was trying to find. For this, he needed to go through all the rooms and check every shelf. Suddenly, he noticed a strange cabinet. Opening it, he saw a huge number of human body parts. The smell and the sight made him feel sick. However, further in, he saw another object that caught his attention. It was an armored chest, and it seemed there could be valuable things inside. There was also a cupboard, and he tried to check what was inside. Luckily, there was water. But he didn't rush to drink it because it could be poisoned. He couldn't trust the enemies. Additionally, he saw a key on the table. His wife continued to wait for him in another room with their daughter. When she saw him, she was overjoyed. He was alive, and moreover, he had found water. His wounds were not deep, so they needed to be treated. There was no heavy bleeding, and he felt okay. Now his daughter could drink the water he had managed to find. Despite the fact that his wounds weren't serious, Jai was in a lot of pain. His daughter and wife didn't leave his side. They loved him and were scared for him. His wife sat by his bed for so long that she fell asleep. But when she woke up, she noticed that her husband was no longer lying there. He had gotten dressed and was preparing to fix the air conditioner so they could have water. The woman couldn't understand where he got so much strength to keep working. In the neighbor's room, he found a battery, hoping that if it worked, he could get the air conditioner running. He needed to do everything he could to collect condensate and produce enough water. He was extremely nervous, trying to do everything right and carefully so that nothing would break. And when he turned on the air conditioner, it really started to drip. Everyone was very happy because now they had the chance to produce at least a little water, which was so essential for their survival. The next night, he couldn't sleep, holding the neighbor's key he had found. The woman noticed this and couldn't understand what he was constantly thinking about and why he was so tense. In reality, he knew about a small car that belonged to the neighbors. It was parked just a few meters from their house, and he could use it. Hearing this, she began to cry, trying to stop him. But her father didn't listen. He wanted to do everything possible to go out and search for supplies to ensure his family's survival. She cried, but even that didn't stop him. They would soon run out of food, and the water would last only a few days. They risked dying of hunger or being attacked by zombies. He couldn't watch his family slowly die. Something had to be done. Even if it was a small chance of success, he had to try because he would never forgive himself if something happened to his family. Now there were far fewer zombies on the streets, and he hoped he could reach the car and stay alive. But what would happen next? He didn't even know how to drive. He didn't have a driver's license. Jai planned to get to the nearest supermarket and try to find some food for his family. He hoped he could find water too. It seemed she wasn't thrilled about his ideas, but she understood that it was critically necessary for their survival and agreed. The next day, the main character began preparing for his journey. He put on all the necessary gear that would protect him. It was very hard to say goodbye to his family, knowing he might never see them again. In the end, they hugged, and he saw his girl start to cry. But there was no time, and he left, carrying only hope in his heart. He tried to move quickly and did everything as carefully as possible to avoid drawing attention to himself. The scene shifted to the present. The main character was trapped. As before, there were still many zombies on the streets, and they began to surround him. Now he was in real danger, as his car started to catch fire and he couldn't escape. It seemed the flames scared the monsters and they began to back away. This gave the man a slight advantage, and with tremendous effort, he finally managed to escape his vehicle. Despite his clothes being on fire, he started moving and tried to flee from them. He realized they were afraid of the flames as they couldn't get close to him at that moment. To protect himself, he needed to find a safe place, and he began trying to climb up a tower. He shed his burnt clothes and was lucky not to have sustained serious burns or injuries. After that, he started running from the monsters along the power lines. When the flames died down, the zombies began to chase the hero, not giving him a chance to break free. Now, having reached the other side, he needed to get rid of his pursuers and started cutting the power lines. Very quickly, a huge number of zombies fell to the ground. But even then, he didn't stop and kept climbing higher. He was lucky as he spotted an open car nearby and hoped it would start, allowing him to escape. There were also keys, which meant he had a new chance at salvation. He tried to carefully approach the car. After that, he was ready to jump inside. He moved so quickly that he managed to get inside and shut the door behind him. Now he could only hope that the car worked and had gas. Despite the danger, he tried to stay calm and careful, and he succeeded. Now he had a car again, and he could continue to flee. The man moved too quickly to get stuck in the crowd of the undead again. However, he didn't even notice that he wasn't alone in the car. There was a zombie right behind him, ready to bite him. Jai was lucky to see it in the rearview mirror, and he hit the brakes. The monster flew through the windshield. After that, he continued moving straight into a massive crowd of zombies. He was forced to drive through them with his own car, as he had no other choice. If he stopped, he would just die, and he wouldn't have another chance to escape the encirclement. Suddenly, he saw a weapon in his car. G was overjoyed, hoping it worked and that there were bullets. Now he could shoot at the zombies that managed to get inside his car through the broken glass. There were few bullets, so he tried not to waste them. Due to the massive number of mutants, his car started to skid. He wasn't an experienced driver, so he couldn't control it. Unfortunately, he flew off the bridge and began to fall. And the zombies that continued to chase him started jumping into the cold water right behind him. Now his car was in the water, and the cabin began to flood. The zombies couldn't swim, so they started to drown, gasping for air. When his car sank to a sufficient depth, he held his breath and left the cabin. G managed to reach the surface, which was covered with the dead bodies of monsters. This was the only safe path, so he didn't leave the water. After a while, G became very tired, and to rest, he decided to stop by a pipe. He realized his strength was running out and decided to stay there for a while. G hoped that place was safe and that they wouldn't be able to reach him. In that state, he lay there until late at night. Exhausted, he fell asleep and slept for a few hours. But he had a terrible dream in which mutants attacked his daughter, Kier. This dream jolted him awake. Now he needed to keep moving, despite the intense pain and fatigue he felt. Ahead was a dark tunnel, but that didn't stop him. There were many grotesque insects in his path, but he kept crawling. Now he found himself in the sewers, where there were many cockroaches and filth. He couldn't surface, as he had no weapon, and there were very few bullets left, so he decided to move through the sewer. He didn't know if it was safe and could only hope that the mutants hadn't reached the sewers. Moreover, besides the mutants, there were many other dangers, as everything around him was unstable and could collapse at any moment. By memory, he managed to reach a local store that wasn't too far from their house. Jai cautiously glanced at the street and realized there were too many mutants. Suddenly, one of them noticed a strange noise. He heard the sound of a hatch, so the monster began moving toward the source of the noise, trying to find its new victim. When the danger passed, he finally managed to surface. G wanted to enter through the back door, but the door was locked. He tried to open it, even though it made a lot of noise. Jai put in a lot of effort, but nothing worked. He almost thought about giving up, convinced he was wasting precious time. However, thoughts of his family wouldn't let him stop. He did everything for them. With immense effort and pain, he succeeded. The door opened, and now he could enter. The store was very dirty and dark. He also heard strange sounds, so he decided to arm himself with a metal pipe. Additionally, the furniture and doors inside were broken, which meant one thing. There were monsters. Cautiously and without rushing, he entered. It was a room with shelves that once held products, but now it was empty. He saw neither food nor water. Others had gotten there first, also searching for supplies and starving. Carefully surveying the entire room, he noticed a strange hole in the wall of the store. He didn't know where it would lead him, but he decided to check it out. When he entered, he found himself in another room, but the feeling of anxiety didn't leave him. Ji was very tense. He tried to move carefully to avoid making noise and drawing attention to himself. Suddenly, he saw a little girl standing by a well with water. Hope surged in him, as he now believed he had finally found a source of water. But when the girl saw him, she got very scared and started to run away. She hid in a hole in the wall, leaving behind a bucket of water. Cautiously, the main character approached it. He couldn't believe his eyes. He could finally drink his fill. He was happy, knowing his efforts weren't in vain. At that moment, the girl was running to her parents. Her mother was being brutally tormented. She was enduring terrible suffering for the sake of her family's survival. Her daughter was terrified when she saw everything with her own eyes. The fat man got angry when he saw her and tried to hurt the girl. He threatened to feed her to the zombies because she wouldn't listen to him, but her mother always defended her. Suddenly, he felt a gun at his head. Now the fat man fell silent. He didn't dare to move, fearing the stranger was a bandit who would shoot him. They all looked at each other. It became very quiet. The fat man tried to explain that he didn't actually want trouble and that they were all good people. Moreover, he explained that he truly loved his child and was just raising her because she wouldn't listen. But the main character didn't believe a word he said. In exchange for his life, he promised to give him all the food and water they had. Also, when he offered him food right then, he wanted to do everything possible to save his own life. The woman began to scream, trying to warn the man as he didn't listen to the fat man because he was a traitor and a liar. With his own hands, he had killed many people. Moreover, he had taken her husband and was now tormenting him. Hearing this, he became very angry and tried to hit her. However, Jai stopped him. He began threatening him with the gun again. Suddenly, the fat man grabbed his hand and tried to wrest the weapon away. Moreover, he struck the main character, causing him to start losing his balance. The advantage was now on his side. He began threatening the main character with the gun, but he didn't fall for his provocations. He waited for the right moment, and when it came, he delivered a powerful blow, smashing his head. The dead body of the grotesque man fell to the ground. When the woman and her daughter realized he was dead, they cried but were also very relieved because now they could be free. She also thought the main character was a criminal and was ready to give him anything he asked for, as long as he didn't touch her daughter. However, Ji stood silently, watching them cry. He explained that he also had a daughter and never intended to hurt them. To calm them down, he hid the weapon and promised not to touch them at all. It also became known that during the quarantine, there had been 57 people in that room, and they were the ones who had survived. Jai couldn't believe the fat man was capable of such things and had killed everyone else. He wanted to find out what had really happened and why everyone had died. However, she couldn't speak. She just started to cry. After the zombies appeared, everyone tried to find a source of water, which was so desperately needed. Her husband managed to reach the water and was ready to share it with all the others who needed it too. Everyone respected him because he had become their hero and savior. They also wanted to make him the leader of their group, as he could give orders and lead them all. Everyone trusted him, so he was ready to try to take on that responsibility. However, there was still one unresolved problem: food, which would also run out very quickly. So they planned to break through the wall to the store to secure everything they needed and continue surviving. Everyone agreed to do it. So he started breaking through the wall first, setting an example for everyone. Out of all the people, only the fat guy was acting really strange and suspicious. He offered to let a man take a break and was planning to work in his place. At first, he behaved normally and even helped people. They all became friendly since they now had a common goal to work towards. People were thrilled when they managed to gather a lot of food and drinks. However, sooner or later, the food would run out, and if they didn't save it, they would quickly start dying of hunger. He planned to distribute food in equal portions every day, and the oldest in their group would be in charge of storing it. Moreover, they were going to start growing their own plants and taking care of the harvest. None of the people took his words seriously. They couldn't imagine how they could grow their own food. They were also scared that this would require going to the surface. Now they had water, and they could plant things on the roof, but they needed to move soil to the first floor for that. If everything went well, in a few months they would be able to eat the food they grew themselves. Everyone was excited about the idea. Very soon they started preparing to plant the crops. First, they selected the potatoes that were starting to sprout. After the soil was processed and prepared, the women began planting the crops. They did everything carefully, hoping each little plant would sprout. None of them doubted that they would succeed because they had enough water to water their plants. They just needed to wait for everything to grow. People were happy. After a while, some shoots began to sprout. Then almost all the plants took root and started growing. Thanks to the abundant water they were given, they grew very quickly. But one of the men couldn't hold back. He ripped up a crop and started eating it right out of the ground. The leader didn't like this, so he wanted to punish him. His behavior disrupted order and left many others without food. He tried to explain to the man that this was just a sprout, which could be eaten when it grew. But the man was so hungry that he was ready to endure a beating, and the leader didn't hold back. He brutally beat him for what he had done. On his way back, he ran into a grandmother and grandfather. They were waiting for him because they had a very serious conversation to have. They checked to make sure no one was eavesdropping, then took him to their room. However, the fat guy was watching everything that was happening and saw how Zhang beat the man who wanted to eat. He became very curious and wanted to listen to their conversation to find out what they were really talking about. The old couple told him that lately they had been giving people as little food as possible, which had led to a rebellion. With the amount they had left, the food would only last a few days. In reality, they had enough food for only a month, and to avoid causing panic among the crowd, they lied. Because of this, they found themselves in a critical situation. This meant they would have to starve for an entire month until the potatoes grew. Once the food ran out, everyone would have to eat the potatoes that hadn't ripened, and that would lead to everyone dying. They were also worried that a war over food could break out, and people might be willing to commit terrible crimes for it. They hoped Zhang could convince the crowd to wait and calm down, and he promised to do so. The fat guy heard their entire conversation. After a while, hunger began to spread through the camp. People refused to work because they weren't getting food and had no strength. They felt terrible and, due to hunger, couldn't even stand on their feet. Instead, they wanted to force the fat guy to work because he, with his large reserve of fat, felt much better. In response, the fat guy mocked them and called them lazy for refusing to work. He also lied to them, saying he had food, which made them immediately get up and try to make peace with him. The fat guy started asking them if the men were really that hungry. And then he told them the fat guy revealed everything he had heard from Zhang's conversation. He called the man a traitor for deceiving his people. He also claimed that it was the grandmother, grandfather, and Zhang who had eaten their food and lied about having enough. When the men heard this, they wanted revenge. Immediately they ran to Zhang, but first they gathered more people to ensure they had the advantage. They all began shouting, demanding their food back, which everyone desperately needed. They considered the old couple traitors who had deceived everyone and eaten all the supplies. Soon Zhang came to them. Everyone started telling him what had happened and accused him of lying. However, Zhang couldn't believe his ears. He didn't expect the people he had worked so hard for to start blaming him. However, many people were losing consciousness from hunger. Then Zhang explained that the supplies were much less than they had initially been told, but he clarified that he just didn't want to cause panic. All the people began to whisper. It seemed they understood. However, the fat guy couldn't accept this. He lunged at the man and tried to hit him. In response, Zhang delivered a powerful blow that stopped him. Immediately, a fight broke out. Everyone was fighting each other for food. The fight was so brutal that people were getting seriously injured. Zhang commanded everyone to stop, as this couldn't go on any longer. It pained him to see how his once friendly people had turned into savages, ready to kill each other for a piece of bread. To reconcile them, he allowed people to take their share of food, but warned that the consequences would be terrible, because they would lose everything, and the harvest they had all worked so hard for would be destroyed. His words calmed everyone down, but no one wanted to give up their food. The next night, all the men gathered on the roof of the building. The fat guy tried to convince them to stage a coup and defeat Zhang. After all, he was a thief who was stealing their food. The fat guy believed that Zhang was trying to do everything possible to let people starve to death. And instead of dying slowly, they needed to go and take their share by force. He wanted to kill anyone who disagreed with him. At that moment, he grabbed a knife, but the people remained calm. The fat guy shouted, calling them cowards. However, in reality, there weren't that many men willing to side with the fat guy. Zhang had many more people, but the fat guy considered them inexperienced and hoped they could win. Suddenly, the first man joined him, who was also hungry and considered Zhang a traitor. Then the next one joined, and gradually, almost all the men on the roof sided with him and agreed to fight for food. Suddenly, one of them stood up. His stomach hurt, so he wanted to go to the bathroom. However, the fat guy wouldn't let him do that. Instead, he simply stabbed him with his own knife. No one could believe their eyes and that the fat guy was capable of such a thing. The body of the dead man lay on the ground. He was the first victim. Now everyone had to touch his body to show their confidence and readiness to fight. The first volunteer appeared, ready to do it. He took the fat guy's knife and confidently approached the dead body. After that, he plunged the knife straight into his back. Finally, the fat guy was genuinely satisfied that he had managed to recruit allies to his side. They began to descend and intended to find the main character and his team, but instead they encountered his daughter. She had no idea that the men were evil and could harm her, so she smiled at them and wanted to give them a flower. Seeing her, the fat guy was overjoyed, realizing he could blackmail Zhang. After that, he became very angry and was going to kill the child, even though she was small and couldn't defend herself. At that moment, Zhang appeared, having rushed to her scream. When he saw what had happened, he couldn't calm down. Even though he was alone, that didn't stop him, and he continued to fight them. He managed to hold off the attackers for a while, but because there were so many of them, he sustained serious injuries. Moreover, he killed a few of them. The dead bodies of the attackers lay on the ground. Because the leader was much stronger, no one could get close to him, and they all feared dying. With his strength and bravery, despite his terrible wounds, he managed to stop the attack. At that moment, the fat guy became very scared, realizing that Zhang would want to kill him. To protect himself, he tried to shield himself with the body of his comrade. Because of that, the comrade died. After that, he pushed the men away from him. Zhang tried to convince them to stop while it was still early, as he couldn't continue fighting due to his injuries. However, they didn't want to stop, as they understood they had a huge advantage after defeating the strongest. The fat guy tried to convince the people that they were on the right path. So they continued to fight and kill everyone. They managed to destroy a huge number of people and capture everyone who tried to hide, including women, children, and the elderly. They threw them down to feed the zombies. But that was the end, as after that he turned the people against each other, and they started a massacre, resulting in everyone dying. Only he managed to escape and stay alive. When the main character heard this story, he was moved. He looked around the place where they lived and noticed there were many different tools. This equipment had been collected by her dead husband. He believed it would be needed by people to continue surviving and to fight against other similar groups in the future. The main character chose the most necessary items he wanted to take with him. After that, he decided to deal with the fat guy. The man was unconscious, so he had to tie him up. He wasn't dead, but he had lost consciousness from a strong blow to the head. After a while, he began to wake up. But when he saw the situation he was in, he became very scared and started begging the man for forgiveness. But the man had no intention of forgiving him after everything he had heard. He began to strip him, taking off all his clothes. After that, he cut him into small pieces. One of them he stuffed into his mouth to muffle his screams. Now the woman and her daughter could take revenge for the death of their husband and father. They could do whatever they wanted to get their revenge, even kill him if they wanted to. At that moment, he approached the girl and handed her a metal rod. He thought it was the right decision, as now she could avenge her father's death. However, he instructed her not to go too far and accidentally kill him, as he could be very useful. The girl agreed and took the weapon from him. She approached her victim and struck him on the head with all her might. Her mother joined her, and together they began to beat him. Meanwhile, the main character was trying to gather as many supplies as possible to take with him, as he considered it his loot that he had earned. He also wanted to eat, so he tried to consume as much as he could to regain some strength. After that, he was going to check if he could see his home from this place. He carefully looked around the apartment building, trying to figure out if there were any living people left. And when he realized that there was no one there, he felt very sad. The lights in the houses were off, which only meant that the people there were dead. He also looked into his own house, where there was no light either. Because of this, he felt very sad and tried to hold back his tears. The girl understood that he was having a hard time and offered him some water. The man happily drank the water and thanked her for it. She also asked if he had tried to find his home where his family lived. However, the man replied that his parents lived not far from here, with whom he had lost contact long ago. He hoped they might still be alive and waiting for someone to rescue them. She thought he was planning to save his parents and was about to set out on a search for them. The man let out a heavy sigh. The main character had no intention of doing that, as he lacked the strength and resources to bring them along. He also mentioned his daughter, who was desperately craving water and waiting for his return, which made him hesitate to leave. Suddenly, a little girl screamed. This saved the main character's life, as he noticed her mother trying to attack him. In that moment, he managed to dodge and grab her by the neck. Ji didn't understand why she did that, since he had saved her and freed her from terrible suffering. So Jai began to threaten her with a knife and was also ready to kill. At the last moment, he thought of his own little girl and felt sorry for leaving a child without parents. This made him stop and reconsider. He released the woman but kept his eyes on her. Now he couldn't tell who he should be more afraid of, the zombies or the people. The poor woman was exhausted and dropped her weapon. She regretted her actions and began to cry. Now that her husband, who always tried to help everyone, was dead, she had lost trust in people and couldn't believe she was saved just like that. She also felt very weak and couldn't continue to protect her daughter any longer. G felt sorry for her, but there was nothing he could change. After all, everyone was suffering and going through tough trials. Human kindness had become a weakness, and one had to think only of their own survival. However, he believed that they still had the right to choose and could forge their own path. He admitted that from the very beginning, he wanted to kill them both, but he chose to believe them, and that nearly cost him his life. He understood that if people didn't change, they would continue to kill each other, and he would never succeed, and the apocalypse would never end. Perhaps her dead husband thought the same way, and that's why he was dead now. Maybe he paid for his own kindness and trust in people. Hearing these words, the woman began to cry. She remembered all the moments that connected her to her beloved. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out. The sound was very close, and the main character rushed to the window to see what was happening. When he looked through the binoculars, he saw a horrifying scene. There were two groups of people fighting in the neighboring buildings. It seemed that both groups had run out of supplies and were now trying to kill each other. One of them was much stronger because they had armor and weapons. The bravest and strongest men were preparing to storm the neighboring building. They managed to break into the crowd and began to destroy everyone in their path. The battle was brutal, and neither side was ready to give up. Many people were dying, and those who were the least fortunate fell down, or zombies tore them apart. The fight was fierce, and the horrifying screams of the poor souls giving their lives for a fleeting hope echoed. The strongest had firearms and ammunition, so they shot at each other from a distance, not risking their own lives. Moreover, people had managed to invent powerful weapons, which were Molotov cocktails. They threw them into the crowd, causing terrible burns. But even that didn't stop many of them. They continued to fight despite their horrific injuries because each of them depended on the survival of the entire crowd. Suddenly, the main character saw his own parents fighting on one side. He couldn't believe his eyes as he saw how hard his father was struggling and realized they were alive. Now he understood that his parents were in real danger because the enemies had managed to throw a net over them. After that, they were in danger, and the enemies began to kick them with their feet and hit them with other objects. Jai cried, but he had no way to change anything or help them. He watched as his parents and other unfortunate people were beaten to death, while he wanted to throw them down to be devoured by mutants. Also, the main enemy leader came to their side and was preparing to kill everyone who wouldn't submit to him. The people who were captured were to be transported to the other side. In reality, they wanted to use them as slaves to work for the enemy camp. His parents were among them, and Jai saw their bodies being taken inside the building. The woman realized these were his parents. They were valuable for their knowledge of people, so they were allowed to stay alive. And then the woman understood that they would likely be prepared for something, as they knew a lot of important information about other people en routes with the fewest mutants. G begged his father to hold on. He was planning to come and help him and free him from captivity. But the woman, hearing about his plan, couldn't believe how he would manage to deal with armed and strong enemies all by himself. However, he didn't know if he would succeed or if he would even survive. But if he didn't do this, his parents would surely die. Now she realized he was very much like her husband and spoke just like him. Therefore, she had no doubt he would succeed and believed in his victory. To prepare, the man went to the garage to find the best weapons and be ready for battle. He managed to find a huge amount of different equipment. He carefully examined all the items that came his way. Then he began to craft, trying to assemble the best and most powerful gear for himself. He used absolutely everything that came to hand. After some time, he managed to create a weapon that could shoot nails. Now he wanted to test its effectiveness. He realized that it could easily penetrate a human body and cause serious injuries. He continued to prepare, and now he needed to try to make some armor for himself. Along with this, he recalled scenes from his childhood when he was a little boy. In school, he was often bullied, and he didn't have enough physical strength to defend himself. However, his father always supported him and made him stand up for himself. He knew his son wasn't respected and was beaten. He had weak arms, so when he tried to make him into a man, his father wanted his son to finally become braver and start defending himself. For that, he needed to take revenge on his enemies and make them stop bothering him. His father constantly told him that he needed to be responsible and brave. He could lose a battle, but he had to retaliate and never give up. The boy didn't take his words seriously, but he knew he was speaking the truth. He decided to heed his advice and do everything as he said. After he returned home, he had even more new wounds and bruises on his body. His father immediately noticed that something was wrong with his son. When his mother saw how he looked, she was very frightened. However, Jai didn't tell them anything. He didn't want his parents to find out what had happened. But his father noticed the bruises on his hands and understood that he had finally managed to defend himself. He smiled secretly and was genuinely proud of his son. The next day, he and his father were called to school. They were taken to the principal's office, where he was forced to apologize to the person he had beaten. Even though he wasn't guilty of what happened and was only defending himself, no one listened to him. The father of his bully was very wealthy and allowed himself to insult the main character. But Jai's father supported his son in any situation and considered him right. Now, a quarrel began between the men, and they risked fighting right in the school. Even though the opponents were significantly more numerous, the man wasn't intimidated. He was ready to take revenge on all of them for his son. He was one against the entire crowd and had to defend himself. However, he easily dealt with all of them and remained unscathed. Now he was able to take revenge for his son and became a true source of pride and an example for him. This brought them very close, and the boy remained grateful to his father for changing his life for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, he continued to craft and tried to develop deadly weapons. The room was filled with a huge number of different tools, from which he tried to create various things. One of these was a rocket launcher, which he filled with many shards and sharp nails. He believed this weapon would be truly dangerous against a massive crowd of people. Suddenly, a woman approached him. She handed him her husband's jacket since they had the same size. The main character thanked her for the gift, and she asked if he had any plans. But first, he needed to get to the neighboring house, and after that, he didn't know what to do. Now he climbed onto the roof. He took the heavy-set man with him. He intended to use him as bait, so he coldly pushed him off the roof of the building. Now the heavy-set man was doomed. He was in for terrible suffering and a slow death. Taking advantage of the moment, he tried to reach the neighboring house. The mutants began to tear his body into small pieces, and all this time he remained alive, but could do nothing. Jai watched how the mutants reacted to the food and tried to move very quickly and quietly. He had a lot of different equipment on him, so it was difficult. But still, after putting in a tremendous amount of effort, he managed to cover a great distance and end up on that very building. All the while, the woman and her daughter were watching him. She didn't believe he could defeat the massive crowd of people by himself. And the worst part was that his family was waiting for him at home. The girl believed that the main character would survive and win. Tears welled up in the woman's eyes, as she wanted that too. Now that he had filled the neighboring house, he was ready to enter the room. The very room where his parents had been taken. Despite being very scared, there was no turning back. He gathered himself and, with a surge of determination, jumped into the room. But surprisingly, it was very quiet inside. When he surveyed the entire space, he saw absolutely nothing. Once he calmed down, he quietly and cautiously began to move further. Instead, there was a huge amount of blood in the room. The trail led to some open doors, and he was determined to follow it, trying to find his family. On his way, he saw a vast number of corpses and human bodies scattered throughout the house. Many of them had died from hunger or other diseases that developed in the closed space. He understood that he needed to be extremely careful and not draw attention to himself. First and foremost, he wanted to find out which direction he needed to go and where to search for his enemies. So he began to listen. Now he had an understanding of where the cries of people were coming from, and he set off to find them. He had to move through the bloody trail that stretched throughout the house. Trying to stay unnoticed and quiet, Jai cautiously began to ascend the stairs. He saw a lot of bloodstains on the walls and floor. Despite being in a house full of enemies, he wasn't scared. He paused for the sake of saving his family. Suddenly, he spotted a light in one of the rooms across from him. Peeking inside, he saw a man sitting with his back to him, oblivious to Jia's presence. He managed to overhear their conversation. That evening, the main house was supposed to be a party, filled with plenty of alcohol and food. They were discussing the details of their operation and the war they had managed to win. Because they had won, they started drinking and forgot they were supposed to be on guard. This was a good opportunity for Jia, and he took full advantage of it. When the men let their guard down, he attacked them, killing one after another. In a panic, they tried to fight him off, but nothing worked. They were all dead. He gave no one a chance to escape and was merciless. Suddenly, he heard a strange sound and saw a glass of blood on the shelf. It soon dawned on him that there were still living people inside. The sound was coming from a closet where a criminal might be hiding. So he wanted to force the enemy out, keeping him in his sights. The criminal was just a kid and didn't want to suffer, begging to be killed instead. But Jai wasn't in a hurry. He wanted to find out where his parents were and if they were even alive. On the roof of the building was a bridge connecting this house to the main structure. He didn't believe the boy, so he wanted to kill him. However, he was curious about how old the boy really was. As it turned out, he was only 14. This made Jai stop. He couldn't just take a child's life, even if he was his enemy. Jai didn't kill Tim. Instead, he tightly bound the boy. He also gagged him so he wouldn't scream and call for help. Ji left the kid in that same room and went to save his parents. Now he needed to get to the main building that connected these houses. For that, he had to go back out onto the roof. There were a lot of enemies, so he had to move quickly and carefully. But when he stepped out, he saw no one. Now he was trying to find the very bridge the boy had mentioned. As it turned out, it was very close, and he spotted it right away. But just as he was about to head to the neighboring house, he stopped, hearing a strange sound behind him. The man quickly turned around to make sure he wasn't in danger. However, behind him stood another man. He looked terrified and was crying. The stranger wanted to be spared and was scared. Jai was about to shoot to end his suffering, but the stranger stopped him. He had kids and wanted them to stay alive. When he looked into the hero's face, he seemed to recognize him. Jai didn't understand who this man really was. Suddenly, he pulled out a weapon and tried to injure the hero, but he failed because Jai was ready for this, expecting the enemy to try to deceive him. He shot him right in the face, coldly taking his life. After that, the man's lifeless body fell down, where it would be torn apart by mutants. Ji simply watched calmly as it all unfolded. When the danger passed, he began to move across the bridge. He heard his enemy screaming, who despite being shot in the face was still alive and now being ripped to shreds. He moved on calmly. However, he noticed there were a lot of mutants outside. The monsters were hungry and quickly devoured the bodies of all the people who had ended up below. Now he managed to reach the neighboring house. Jai found himself inside. In front of him, he saw two people. Music was playing and everyone was drinking. So they simply didn't pay him any attention, and Jai walked past them unnoticed. This time he was lucky, but he had to be very careful and try to act inconspicuously. Inside, it was a real celebration. Heavy music was playing and everyone was dancing and having fun. They were the victors of the war, so they wanted to celebrate. Also in the middle of the hall sat the leader, surrounded by food and women. He was the main organizer of this celebration. There were also many prisoners inside who were about to be tortured in front of everyone. To stay alive and become members of their clan, the poor souls had to eat pieces of human flesh. The crowd loved it, so they started cheering. Some tried to do it, but they couldn't manage. Then a cruel punishment awaited them. They were simply killed. The people had no choice. They were forced to do what they were told. Otherwise, they would just be killed, and their bodies thrown to the monsters. Suddenly, the same boy appeared in the middle of the crowd. He had managed to untie himself and get inside the house. But when he tried to inform the leader about what had happened, he didn't believe him, thinking the kid was just trying to ruin the party for everyone. But it was too late because the hero had made it inside the house. He opened fire with his weapon. Now everyone inside realized that the war wasn't over. But they didn't know who the hero was or how he had managed to get inside the house. The leader wanted to eat him alive, as the unknown had caused him great harm, and many of his men were dead. Now the hero was determined to do everything possible to keep killing enemies. And to remain unnoticed, he turned off the lights, plunging the whole room into darkness. Those with flashlights were lucky, as they could see the hero. Now they tried to block the stairs to prevent the man from entering their room and shooting them all. Suddenly, the hero vanished, instead throwing an explosive mixture at the enemies. Now everything was engulfed in flames and people began to burn alive. The leader urgently ordered everyone to extinguish the fire, as they simply had no way to leave the room. Many people suffered burns while trying to put out the fire, and those who dared to flee were met by the hero, who simply shot them down. He sat in the darkness waiting for the people to come to him. The flames held them back, giving him time to try to find all the prisoners. The man was lucky, as at the end of the corridor he saw a light and in a cage sat his parents. Emotions overwhelmed him, but when he saw what was happening to all the prisoners, his heart nearly stopped. He urgently needed to do something, as he risked not being able to save them in time. Meanwhile, the enemies managed to extinguish the flames and were already trying to find him. Ji managed to hide behind the stairs and held his breath so they wouldn't hear him. Despite the danger, he began to move. He tried to descend a few floors lower, but saw mutants that had managed to break in. There were so many of them that Jia had to flee. The only way to escape was up, so he started running in that direction. And when he broke away from them, he managed to block the door. Jai didn't believe such a barrier would completely stop them, but now he had a little time. The man decided to take a risk. For that, he planned to let the monsters inside. He hoped they wouldn't see him and would just run past. But suddenly, the same boy appeared before him, the one who had told everyone about him. He wanted to kill him, but there was no time for that, so he just ran on. Very soon, the monsters would burst into the house, destroying everything in their path. The doors broke down, and the little boy saw a huge number of mutants in front of him. The trapped people screamed and called for help, but nothing could save them. Meanwhile, the prisoners were safe, as a cage separated them from the monsters. They all pressed against the wall, trying to survive this horrific moment. Now the hero's path to his parents was blocked. To reach the other part of the house, he had to go outside. He moved very carefully, trying to keep his balance. However, he saw through the window the same boy who had miraculously broken away from the zombies and locked himself in one of the rooms. But now it had become a trap for him, as the monsters would soon break down his door too. He tried to shout to the hero, begging to be saved. But the man didn't have time for that. He needed to keep moving. Despite the monsters being close, he decided to save him, as the boy was just a child. So he turned back and tried to break the net. He bent it with his own hands just enough for the boy to crawl out, but warned him never to let himself be seen again. The child's life was saved, and he continued moving forward. Above him, he saw a window and realized it was the same room where his poor parents were. He managed to reach them, and peering inside, he saw them. It was really them. They couldn't believe their eyes, as they had no idea if their son was alive. But now, he was saving them, trying to do everything to bend the heavy metal. Along with them, he managed to save all the other prisoners, and now they were moving through a narrow passage. Every step could be their last, so everyone tried to move slowly and carefully. Now the hero began to climb up. He needed to reach the bridge that connected this house to the other. But as he ascended, he saw that his enemies had managed to block the stairs and were still alive. They had closed off the passage with everything they could find. The people left there were doomed. They wouldn't let anyone in. Jai finally managed to reach the bridge, but when he was about to climb up, he saw that there were a lot of enemies waiting for him. They were all trying to escape, as it was the only way to safety, but suddenly they noticed Jai and stopped. Many people, along with the hero, remained inside, but soon their defense would break, so they needed to retreat. They all quickly made it to the surface. However, the bridge was broken. The enemies were in deadly danger, but they saw Ji. He was moving along the ropes, trying to get to the other side. The hero knew he had been spotted. Now Jai realized he was in real danger. He and his parents froze, waiting for something terrible to happen. And what they feared the most happened. The enemies had weapons, because one of the enemies shot straight at the man. A blood stain appeared on his face. Moreover, he felt such intense pain that he could barely hold on to the rope. Meanwhile, his wife couldn't calm down. In her arms was their daughter, who was constantly crying, waiting for her father to return. She heard the gunshots and voices from many blocks away from their home, but she knew something terrible had happened. She remembered how long ago she and her husband had watched a zombie movie. Back then, it seemed very scary to her, and she couldn't watch it calmly. At that time, she couldn't even imagine that these events could become their reality. Now she found herself in the hero's place, eagerly waiting for her hero husband to return, risking his life. Back then, they hadn't thought about how precious the food they had was. And zombies seemed only imaginary, and in reality, no one could believe they existed. For some reason, the woman felt uneasy, even though it was just a movie. For a moment, she imagined that all the events could actually happen to them. But even if that were to happen, the man had promised to protect her at any cost. It seemed he didn't believe such a thing was possible. Yet now, with him not by her side, she recalled his words and longed to see him just once. Due to his injuries, the man began to bleed out and nearly fell from the rope. Still, he exerted tremendous effort and endured excruciating pain to hold on. After all, if he fell, a certain death awaited him below. His father tried to shout to him, but Jai didn't respond. So to save him, he climbed up and tried to prevent him from falling. In the end, he managed to save his son. Everyone helped him reach the neighboring house. The enemy continued to fire at them, but he had run out of ammunition. However, he had another weapon. It was a rope which he could use to reach people and try to knock them off the house. At the end of it was a hook, so he could reach the neighboring house. Others had similar equipment, so now they were planning to reach their house. Meanwhile, Jai was receiving medical assistance, and they were trying to stop the heavy bleeding. But suddenly, they noticed the enemies starting to climb over to their side. Even the destroyed bridge didn't stop them. The leader began to threaten them, especially wanting to kill the protagonist who had ruined his celebration and condemned many of his men to death. However, this time Ji didn't have the strength to fight. Along with the others, he began to retreat. Now the enemies were trying to reach their house and were doing everything they could to do so. To stop the attackers, the people began to build fortifications. But to make their defense much more effective, they decided to set it on fire. They had very few items, so they used absolutely everything they could find for defense. The enemies who were getting closer realized that the people had started a fire to stop them. But even with that, they weren't going to stop, as they couldn't believe that people were truly willing to take such a desperate step and set fire to the house. So they continued to push forward. The flames stopped them, and the enemies kept advancing, suffering serious injuries and burns. At that moment, the protagonist and his greatest enemy locked eyes. The criminals managed to leap over the fire. Suddenly, a powerful blow that Jai didn't expect at all. The strong criminal began to kill those who tried to stop him. A real massacre began, and many men from both sides were dying. In the heat of battle, he grabbed the protagonist and held him by the throat. Now, as he prepared to strike and was ready to kill him, suddenly his father appeared out of nowhere. He managed to stop the attacker and seriously wound him, risking his own life for his son. However, the enemy managed to dodge and remain unscathed. After that, he struck back directly in the man's stomach. But he didn't stop and continued to fight him. He managed to evade many of his attacks, staying safe and unharmed. Then the protagonist realized that the man was very strong and skilled, despite his age. And if he had been younger, he definitely would have been able to kill him by now. But right now, he wasn't in as good shape as before. Because of that, the enemy managed to wound him. He began to beat the old man right in front of his son's eyes. Jai could only watch as his loved one was beaten before him. He wanted to stop it, but he understood he didn't have much strength for that, especially since he was injured. Jai gathered his strength, and when the moment for an attack came, he acted. Blow after blow, he began to strike the strong enemy. However, his allies stopped him. The people united to stop the enemies and prevent them from advancing further. For the first time, the mask flew off the enemy's face, and everyone saw his horrific visage. The enemy promised that all these people would die. Suddenly, a loud explosion erupted behind him. The shockwave knocked his body back, and the flash from the flames was visible for blocks around. A woman who had been watching everything unfold saw it. The smoke and flames terrified her. She couldn't believe that Jai had died, but in reality, he was alive. The people were also alive, but many of them had sustained serious injuries. Meanwhile, the main enemy was also alive. He was the only one who had managed to survive, but he had sustained serious wounds. Moreover, he had lost fingers and couldn't get up. He was missing a leg and soon risked dying from blood loss. From the rubble, others began to crawl out, those who had also managed to survive. Now they were preparing to continue attacking the people. But despite the leader's orders, none of them dared to do so. Even though he started shouting, they weren't going to move forward and attack the group of people. Suddenly, a sharp knife struck him right in the face. His own people began to kill him, as they didn't want to simply walk into certain death. The protagonist watched all of this unfold. They decided to leave them and wanted to exit the building before the flames completely engulfed it. Suddenly, the woman spotted the protagonist and was overjoyed to realize he was still alive. Her daughter was also thrilled to see that Jaya had survived. Now the woman thought about how to signal her husband in which direction he needed to go. So, she instructed her daughter to bring a flashlight. In the darkness, it was very visible. Soji noticed it without any trouble and knew which direction he needed to head. That was where his salvation lay, as the woman had plenty of food and water to last them all for a while. The people began to move. They did so along the power lines. The protagonist, who was walking behind, cut the wires as he went to prevent the enemies from catching up. Now they were safe because the enemies had no chance of catching them. After a while, they reached the inside of their house. Suddenly, everyone began to applaud him. Jai had become their savior, and besides his own parents, he had saved many others. They all took pride in him and thanked him for the gift of life and salvation. Many of them had lost their own families. But now they needed to come together to continue surviving. People had to support one another. Moreover, the woman was ready to share her food and water supplies with everyone and allowed them to live in this house. Ji gave them hope for a new life, so they wanted him to become their leader. After the people regained their strength, they needed to leave their own house. He, along with his friends, stepped out onto the street to embark on a dangerous journey. However, moving on the surface was very dangerous because there were many mutants on the streets. So they chose the sewers, which remained the safest place. Others watched them and hoped they would succeed. His father couldn't go with him due to his injuries, but he knew his son was a hero. The men continued moving through the narrow tunnel. On their path was a lake they needed to swim across. To conserve their strength, they decided to use inflatable rings that were in the house. The men managed to do this and reach the shore, but immediately encountered mutants. A fight broke out. They tried to kill the mutants that were approaching them. To keep moving, they needed to reach the roof of the building. The men acted very cohesively, so they tried to do this as quickly as possible. They had no chance for error, as they were constantly being pursued by many zombies. Through their combined efforts, they found themselves on the roof where the mutants couldn't reach them. And to ensure they couldn't get to them, they had to take the ladder away. Now the men moved on, helping each other. Gradually, they were getting closer to their goal. Now they were very close to the protagonist's home, just a few blocks left to go. G knew his family was waiting for him, and he believed they were okay and alive. Ahead lay the hardest part of the journey. Because the distance to the neighboring house was very large, and the street that separated them was too wide and dangerous. Before moving on, they decided to rest and gather their strength. The zombies on the street were very strong and fast. Also, one of the men knew that even they couldn't do without water and some food. He had seen with his own eyes how the dead drank water from the ditch, ate cats, dicks, and other corpses. Moreover, they attacked each other. Additionally, it became clear that zombies couldn't swim and were afraid of fire. The virus attacked the human brain, and a person infected with it lost control over their emotions and couldn't control themselves. Also, people lost part of their physical sensations. Their sense of pain and fatigue dulled, and practically, they felt almost nothing. It was also noticeable that zombies experienced epileptic seizures, which occurred because the virus destroyed brain cells. Perhaps they became aggressive precisely when they saw people, and then their coordination improved. Moreover, their hearts were beating and alive because blood was flowing from their bodies. The corpses didn't rot and didn't get infected. This meant that the virus could spread not only through a bite or the blood of the infected. But no one knew this. It was likely that there were also other ways to contract the virus. The places in the city were very familiar to the men. On one of the playgrounds they had played when they were children. Suddenly they remembered that there was a factory nearby for making feed. This meant there was a lot of food there. They were so preoccupied that they didn't even notice a group of people had appeared behind them. These were factory workers who didn't want to share their food, so they advised them to leave. Immediately, Jai thought these people were cannibals. But when he looked closely into the eyes of their leader, he realized that wasn't the case. He tried to explain that they weren't looking for shelter, but had just stopped on their territory to rest. The old man told them about the road that was below. He agreed to help them. The men didn't trust him, but they had no other choice. They decided to go with him since they had nothing to lose. G explained that he wanted to save his family, which he had left in the apartment, and the men who were going with him were his friends, so they agreed to help. Additionally, the protagonist noticed that many doors were locked. Inside the closed rooms, there were many mutants, and the old man was trying to conduct experiments on the infected. He wanted to try to understand the nature of the disease and find a cure. Now they had come to the same place and began to descend. The men found themselves inside a narrow underground tunnel. For added security, there were metal bars and guards inside. Here, the old man was going to stay until they had to move on their own. He promised that at any moment they could return and use their passage. When the men reached the surface, they stretched the rope and began to move toward Jaya's house. They were almost there, just a little bit further to go. Jai could almost see his house, and now he felt as if he hadn't been home for a whole year. So he wanted to see his loved ones as soon as possible. However, the cage on the roof was open, which meant there could be many mutants inside. Suddenly, they spotted the first one. A zombie lunged at the men without warning. There were so many mutants that the people had no choice but to run for their lives. The chase continued, and they urgently needed to find a safe place. Just then, they found themselves at the edge of a building surrounded by mutants. It seemed like there was no chance of escape, and in the panic, Jia slipped. The man began to fall. However, he got incredibly lucky. G managed to catch his foot on a metal grate, so he stayed alive. Now they were trapped, unable to return to the roof where the mutants awaited them. The only way to escape was to break through the grates and get inside through someone's apartment. But that wasn't easy, as there were plenty of mutants inside. One of them nearly bit the man's arm, but he managed to shove it away. More monsters began to descend toward them. They had to flee, and they had to do it fast. So the men started to climb down as the zombies pursued them. There were so many that the men made a desperate decision. To survive, they wanted to reach the neighboring house. Fortunately, they managed to do it just in time. A few more seconds, and they would have been done for. Ji started shouting, hoping Feng Yun would hear him. She recognized his familiar voice and couldn't believe it was her savior. Feng Yun stepped out onto the balcony and saw her husband not far away. Tears welled up on her face. He was alive. Emotions overwhelmed them both, and he started to cry too. Finally, after a long time apart, he got to see his family again. He tried to reassure his wife as he had returned safe and sound, just as he promised. His daughter had missed him terribly and was overjoyed to finally see him. She was also thrilled to see his childhood friends by his side. The men intended to take his family and move them to a safe place where all the survivors could live. Moreover, his friends were ready to risk everything for him, as the main character was their savior. However, Jai remained very humble. Just then, they spotted a zombie. The mutants managed to reach them, and now everyone was in real danger. Jai quickly ushered his family inside the house. He stayed on the balcony with the others and began to fight back. A strike! The first monster was taken down. Another one came, just as strong. The man smashed its face with a sharp knife. That wasn't enough. They couldn't handle the sheer number of mutants. The zombies managed to topple over onto their building and started getting inside. Now there were too many. At this rate, they wouldn't last long, as the grate wouldn't hold against such pressure. The only way to escape was to get out of the apartment through the back window. Meanwhile, the grate began to break, and some zombies could get inside. Ji tried to stop them, but all his efforts were in vain. The grate was broken, and now the zombies could come in. However, his family was already starting to climb down from the window, so he needed to hold on for a while and try to delay the mutants. That was the only way his family could escape. For him, saving them was the most important thing. Jai could no longer hold them back. The grate was broken, so he began to run. At the last moment, he managed to leap out the window and save himself. Now he found himself on the ground, next to his family. People continued to flee and began to descend. After that, they reached the neighboring house, where a rope had been stretched. The people didn't know what awaited them inside, but they could no longer stay outside. Overcome with fear and stress, his daughter Kira began to cry. To calm her down, the man had to give away their last food supplies. He tried to explain that the mutants were bad and could eat them, so she needed to stay close and do everything he said. Now that the child was calm, they could move on. Ahead was the tunnel they had come through. Finally, they sighed in relief, as it seemed they had found a safe place. However, the workers there were acting very strangely. It seemed like they were just sleeping, as they didn't react to the people at all. Jai touched one of them, hoping they would open the door. But he quickly realized that all the workers were infected and had turned into mutants. They began to attack the people. He was incredibly lucky, as at the last moment the man managed to shove a zombie away from him. A fight broke out, and the men tried to take down all the infected. Feng Yun was defenseless. She had no weapon. She watched as the men, risking their lives, tried to kill the monsters with their bare hands. At all costs, they wanted to protect her and the child and not let them die from a zombie bite. The battle was tough because there were so many mutants. Feng Yun covered her daughter's eyes so she wouldn't see the horror happening in the tunnel. When it was over, the men wanted to catch their breath. Now they were trapped. They didn't know if other people had been infected and what awaited them on the surface. However, they had no other way. They simply couldn't go back. The only way was forward, and at any cost, they needed to return. Suddenly, the lights in the tunnel went out, forcing the people to move almost blindly. The terrifying atmosphere became even more tense. He ordered one of his friends to stay close to his family. He, along with the others, planned to go ahead for reconnaissance. They needed to check if the tunnel was really safe. They began to move, but on their path, they saw a lot of blood. The walls and floor of the tunnel were covered in blood, which meant a battle had taken place here. Moreover, they heard strange sounds. It was the growling of zombies, unmistakable and chilling. As they moved further, they saw a pile of corpses tearing apart human bodies. What they feared the most had happened. Now the group that had helped them was dead. And without them, they wouldn't be able to escape the tunnel and return. A fight began, with just them against a massive number of mutants. However, they didn't back down. They continued to stand and fight. For a while, they managed to fend them off, but new zombies kept coming. Still, the first group of mutants was taken down. Ji raised his flashlight. Now they could continue moving forward. The men were covered in blood, scared and hungry, but they weren't about to turn back. Ahead, they saw an exit. There was a ladder they could climb to get inside the building. The main character went first. Inside the room, he saw the bodies of other people. His friend followed behind him. When they examined the bodies, they realized what had really happened. These people had fallen victim to the mutants, and there were arrows in their bodies. Once he was sure it was safe in the room, he led the others in. The doors to the room were locked from the other side, which gave them hope that people might still be alive. Jai tried to break them down, and after a while he succeeded. Suddenly, the sound of a gunshot. Ji shielded his wife and daughter with his body and ordered everyone to get down. The shooting didn't stop, and there were arrows all over the walls. One of them got stuck in his backpack. The man started shouting, hoping the people would believe him and stop. From the other side, a voice could be heard, and after a while, someone peeked through a small window into the room. Suddenly, the door swung open. Armed men entered, ready to shoot the entire group of the main character on sight. After them came the leader, who recognized Ji. But even after his appearance, the soldiers didn't lower their weapons. In fact, it was a test to see if the people were infected. Only after that would they be allowed inside. The first symptoms would appear within half an hour, so they just had to wait. The man also learned that the people had managed to kill all the zombies in the tunnel. With this act, they exceeded all his expectations, and then he realized he was in the presence of strong and brave warriors. As a sign of gratitude, he planned to treat them to food and drinks, so he invited the people to join him. However, Jai didn't trust his words. He just wanted them to let them go and refuse the food and any gifts. The old man remained silent. He stared intently at the main character's face, and when his soldier began to threaten the people, he simply silenced him. It seemed the old man understood that Jai was scared and didn't trust him. Still, he forced the people to follow him, and soon they brought out food and drinks. At any moment, he could have ordered them all killed, so the people had no choice. However, none of them ate anything except for the guy in the blue suit. He was so hungry that he completely forgot about caution. Moreover, he was very surprised when no one but him even touched the food. Now people were risking their lives for such food, so at that moment rice buns became a true delicacy. However, the man didn't take his words seriously. He was convinced this was just a ploy by the leader to gain their respect. But the old man took his words as a threat and became very angry about it. They began to argue, so to calm them down, the main character intervened. He was also curious why they weren't being let go, and it only meant one thing: they were needed. In fact, the old man wanted to ask them for a favor. Moreover, he wanted to make a deal with them. Suddenly, all the people looked at him. As it turned out, the old man had lost contact with his son, who lived in another district, so he wanted the people to go look for him. However, everyone knew that there were no people left in that area. All the houses had been taken over by mutants. Moreover, the man had sent several units to rescue him, and none of them had returned. Jai understood that his son was dead, as so much time had passed since the quarantine was imposed. But that didn't bother him at all, because he wouldn't change his mind for anything. June tried to explain that they weren't experienced fighters, and besides, there were too few of them for such a journey. But the main character stopped him. He had conditions, and if the old man agreed, then he would go look for his son. The old man became interested and decided to listen to him. For the return of his son, Jay wanted 1,000 kilograms of grain. But when the man heard his words, he fell silent. Still, he agreed, but there was another condition that the man was about to state. Jay wanted his wife and daughter to be taken to a safe place, to his parents. After that, he would calm down. But after his words, the leader just laughed. He dropped a glass of water on the ground. It shattered, and that was a sign. After that, the people began to be tied up, and attempts were made to capture them. Jai had no choice but to try to resist. He started fighting back and managed to injure one of the attackers. After that, another blow. Even a few strong workers couldn't calm him down. However, when a weapon was pointed at his wife, he stopped. Jai understood that she would be shot immediately, so he had no other choice. His daughter was crying, but Jai couldn't do anything to stop this nightmare. He simply gave up and waited for the enemies to tie him up. The cunning old man mocked them, reveling in the helplessness of the people. The old man thought Jia was trying to trick him and was really just looking for a way to escape. As he laughed, the protagonist's eyes filled with rage. His wife and daughter were left in the camp while they were sent on a mission under the threat of weapons. He didn't want to be separated from her again. Feng Yun was crying. She was scared again for her husband's life. Care wanted to comfort her. She believed her father was a superhero and could save them again. The old man tried to explain that he wasn't evil. He wanted to help them, but more than anything, he wanted to find his own son. After those words, the woman couldn't hold back. She didn't want to say this earlier, but now she couldn't stop herself. She started yelling at him for his treachery. The old man had grabbed them just when they needed help, but the soldiers covered her mouth so she wouldn't scream or insult the old man anymore. The man was convinced he was doing the right thing. In his opinion, everyone should think of themselves first, just like he thought of his own son. Suddenly, he turned to the man and woman standing beside him. He ordered them to lower their captives and handle them as carefully as possible. They couldn't be tortured. Moreover, he ordered them to feed them well and give them plenty of drinking water. Deep down, he hoped the men would manage to bring his son back. Meanwhile, the men continued to navigate the streets of the city, which were crawling with zombies. They had to jump from building to building because walking on the street was too dangerous, as it was swarming with mutants. Their journey was perilous, so they helped and watched out for each other. One of them had an idea. He wanted to try to capture the old man's daughter and use her to free the protagonist's family. However, Jai was convinced it wouldn't work so easily because his daughter wasn't as important to him as his own son. Just then, she appeared right behind them. She had set out to find her brother. She had overheard the men's conversation and knew that her father loved his son more than her. The men realized this was a good opportunity. They could kill all of them right now and then strike back. But the woman was convinced it wouldn't work because her father had very good security and many guards scattered throughout the city. Right now, they could see secret agents hiding in nearby houses or on the streets. So if they dared to take such a desperate step and tried to capture the old man, he would definitely be able to stop them. In truth, she didn't love him because he didn't value her or take pride in her and her great son. She had become his problem the moment she was born. Her relationship with her father was very difficult, but she was willing to risk her life for him. But in reality, she was doing it for her brother, whom she loved dearly despite being his favorite. Instead of wasting time, it was better to think about the next plan. She pulled out a map, where a green dot marked a safe place to stop. It became clear that they needed to cover a great distance, making this a very dangerous operation. There were many large buildings in that area. The streets were wide. Also, there was a public park, where there would likely be many mutants. The map marked another area with many tall buildings. Additionally, there was the old town center, the scariest place they could end up, with a large square packed with mutants. The map also showed a yellow line, which was the subway route. However, the woman reported that it was incomplete and construction had not been finished. In any case, they needed to pass through the city center, so they had to try to devise a plan. Time was running out, so they kept moving. They didn't notice the large number of people who had managed to survive, hiding in their homes without food or water. But they couldn't help any of them. Each time, they had to walk past people who were dying. One woman, who hadn't left her apartment for months, begged for a little food and water. The girl stopped, feeling sorry for the old woman, so she gave her a bit of their food supplies. The old woman was overjoyed. However, the protagonist stopped her. He knew the old woman was a cannibal, so there was no need to waste time on her. At that moment, she pulled out a knife. She tried to attack the girl with it. At the last moment, the girl managed to dodge and avoid the attack. In reality, it was a trap that had caught many people. Now, real danger threatened them as armed people began to attack. One of the guards who was with them was injured. She managed to wound one of the attackers, but the fight was far from over. The doors to the apartment burst open and armed people started rushing out, right at them. There were a lot of them, and they were heading straight for the protagonists. Additionally, an armed group began running from the other side. Now they were surrounded and had serious problems. She had no other choice, so she tried to blackmail them, promising to blow up the building along with herself. This made the men stop, as none of them wanted to die. G had one of them in his sights, but the man was afraid the woman might actually blow up the building, so he didn't want to take the risk and halted. Suddenly, a strange scream came from inside the building. Out came the very woman from whom it all began. The old woman looked very frail, but when all the soldiers saw her, they were terrified. It seemed they all feared her. After all, she was the leader. Just at that moment, a woman from her group lost her husband and couldn't bear it any longer. She felt so sad that she decided to let him try a rice ball, at least before he died. In reality, the food was very delicious, and he thanked her for the gift. But now he was dead. People began to cry because he had been a very good soldier. The old woman also cried deeply and began to regret trying to attack those armed men. But when the others caught the scent of the rice ball, they realized it was very tasty. He remembered the day she first tried human flesh. That was when the old woman gathered them all in her kitchen and decided to feed them. No one expected to see a soup with so much meat in it. Moreover, it was very delicious. But many people wondered where she could have gotten so much meat and prepared so much food. Besides, none of them had seen any animals or other food. This question troubled them. Where could she have found the meat? But she didn't answer. The woman simply stood up and left the table, but everyone saw her bandaged and cut leg. At that moment, everything became clear. What had really happened to her leg? People wanted an explanation from her. But in reality, she had cut off a piece of her own leg just so they could eat. None of them could understand why she did it, and they wanted to repay her for the kindness she had shown them. They cried, but the woman insisted that she was fine. She did it because she was old and could die at any moment. All the people were very young, and she hoped this would benefit them. The boy who cried was her favorite, and she remembered that he had been a very good boy in childhood. Now the boy who was her favorite was dead. Now his dead body could become food to be shared among the other people. When they had food, the old woman let them leave, as she didn't want others to die as well. Many of the soldiers couldn't understand her behavior and didn't know why they just let the people go. But the woman was convinced they weren't murderers and did everything for their own survival. Now the group of people found themselves in an area with large, tall buildings. The streets were indeed very wide, as they had seen on the map, so there were many corpses. Now the protagonist needed to gather all the necessary equipment. They wanted to move to the neighboring building, but a wide street separated them. He had prepared very well, so he had a special gun that he wanted to throw a rope to the other building. It was a rifle he had managed to assemble from all the items he found under the rubble. He fired, but on the first try, he missed. The range was too short. Jai tried again, but this time he failed too. Each time he failed, and he had to start all over again. The people had already lost hope of crossing the wide street and wanted to turn back. However, they had another plan as they saw through the binoculars a tree that was very tall and grew right where the rifle could reach. The rope they had might be enough, but to reach the tree, they needed to descend to the square. Despite the danger, G began to descend. When he reached the ground, all the mutants around him started running. The protagonist began to run because there were too many monsters, and he wouldn't be able to handle them all. The people on the roof started protecting him and tried to shoot the mutants that were chasing him. They threw Molotov cocktails at them and set them on fire. They also pretended to shoot with bows and aimed precisely at the target. This allowed the protagonist to gain an advantage, and gradually he got closer to his goal. Now he was very close to the red car and the tree. G picked up speed and jumped onto the car. Then he grabbed a branch of the tree and tried to climb it. When he reached the tree, he tried to pull the rope that the people were holding from the other end. From the tree, he managed to reach the neighboring building, which was what he had been trying to do. He succeeded, and very quickly he found himself on the neighboring building. Now he needed to pull the rope so that the other people could reach him and continue their journey. He was so focused that he didn't even notice a mutant appearing behind him, starting to chase him. To prevent it from biting him, the man flipped over and threw himself down. The people couldn't help him as the distance was too great, and their arrows simply didn't reach him. So now he was face to face with a strong mutant that wanted to eat him. The giant creature was right in front of him. The protagonist prepared to fight it, but the hero realized the mutant was on the glass, so he could outsmart it. And he did, and to avoid risking his life, he simply destroyed the glass beneath it. However, the mutant managed to grab the edge of the metal support with its paw. The man simply chopped off its fingers. Now it seemed the danger had passed, as the mutant was on the ground. The height wasn't very great, so the creature landed on the ground and remained alive. The zombie didn't want to give up so easily, so it got back on its feet and tried to attack him again. It attempted to jump and grab the metal support again to reach the man. On the first try it failed, and the people watched as the zombie tried to get to him. Its hand was very strong, and it reminded him of a talking creature. Realizing that sooner or later it would reach him, the protagonist needed to escape. He tried to climb higher. The man was doing it as quickly as he could to shake off his pursuer. However, the zombie was clever and attempted to climb the metal support again. To do this, it climbed the same tree. From there, it could successfully reach the ledge on the building. The creature moved very quickly and would soon catch up to the man. To stop it, people tried to hit it with arrows, but that was very dangerous, as they could accidentally hit the main character. Still, the zombie managed to catch up and grab the man by the leg. In that moment, he thought it was the end for him, as he definitely couldn't handle such a strong mutant. He was just incredibly lucky, as a woman practically saved his life. With her own arrow, she shot it right in the arm, stopping it. This made the creature very angry. It saw that it was being shot at from the neighboring building. At that moment, she aimed at it again. Suddenly, the arrow hit it directly and struck it right in the back. Meanwhile, the main character managed to reach the roof of the building. He exhaled in relief, glad to be alive and to have completed the dangerous task. But then he saw that despite the numerous arrows, the monster was still alive and continued to pursue him relentlessly. However, the man didn't panic. He was ready for this. He aimed and shot it right in the forehead. Even though the shot was deadly and the arrow hit it straight in the eye, the mutant remained alive. It simply pulled the arrow out of its own skull and wanted to tear the main character into tiny pieces. Suddenly, another shot. This arrow went right through it. But even that didn't stop it, and it continued to stay alive. The main character had no other choice, so he tried to chop it with his own axe. But when he swung, the zombie caught his arm and stopped the blow. Now they began to fall to the ground. But he managed to push the creature away from him. He got back on his feet and tried to attack the main character again. G realized that defeating it wasn't going to be easy, so he chose a different tactic. He moved very quickly, not allowing the zombie to surround him. Because of this, he managed to bind the creature. But that wasn't the end. To restrain such a strong mutant, he needed much more rope, so he kept tying it up. Finally, he managed to secure it tightly and hoped it would work. Others noticed that the main character was in the game and had managed to defeat the strong mutant. And while the creature hadn't escaped, they needed to pull the rope as quickly as possible to reach it. Despite the fact that there were many mutants below and the rope was very low over them, they had to move forward. One by one, people began to do just that. After a while, they all found themselves on the neighboring building. Now, they could closely observe the immortal monster trying to attack the main character and wanting to kill him. This mutant was truly very dangerous and strong. Moreover, it had intelligence. If all zombies became like this, people would die without a single chance of survival. However, they couldn't lose hope in such difficult situations and needed to find salvation at any cost. The guard, who had once been a veterinarian, wanted to check the creature's internal organs. He managed to locate its heart and wanted to see if it would die after this. With all his strength, he stabbed it with a knife right in the heart. The man realized it was still there as blood began to flow from the heart in the wound. Then he continued to strike at other internal organs, trying to find its weak spot. Everyone watched what was happening, but it was clear that the creature was much stronger than ordinary zombies. And even with internal damage, it wasn't dying. To kill it, they needed to cut off its head or injure its brain. They didn't have much time left, so they had to keep moving. As before, they tried not to go down to the streets and use the rope to climb from building to building. Ahead of them was a large square, so they needed to move across the pedestrian bridge. Thus, they managed to overcome this difficult challenge. Next, they found themselves in a tall building they had to pass through, as they couldn't reach its roof. To get inside, they had to bend the protective grates that covered almost all the windows. When everything was ready, the people found themselves inside. They moved cautiously through the building, checking each room. It would get dark very soon, so they needed to find a safe place. That safe place could be their apartment, so they lit a fire and planned to spend the night there. The conversation turned to the old man and how he had a lot of food and no one had ever robbed him. This information wasn't a secret, so the girl agreed to tell the man everything. After the outbreak began, her father united all the people in the building and did everything possible for them to work together. They constantly bought underground tunnels and sometimes fought with other neighboring buildings that had similarly united groups of people. They fought for a factory that had huge supplies of metals and other food, and all the wealth belonged to her father. He managed to create a special food group that included people with families. They lived in a warehouse that was isolated from the outside world. Additionally, her father had planted explosives in the warehouse and was ready to blow it up at any moment. He had a lot of power and paid all the people with food for their work, while those who didn't work got nothing. Everyone at the factory knew very well about his methods of governance, and everyone agreed with it, so even small children worked. There was no guarantee that somewhere in the world there was another person like her father, so people always remained loyal and didn't want to betray him. Everyone listened to her story very attentively and tried to understand who her father really was. While people were talking, it became very dark outside. They all took turns sleeping, and a few people always stayed on watch. Now it was the guard's turn, who worked at the warehouse. He watched carefully as the woman slept. Gradually, as he began to approach her while she slept, he wanted to grab her and strangle her. But in reality, she heard him and was watching every step he took, not ready for this, and hid a knife. At the last moment, she managed to stop him and press the knife to his neck. In truth, the guard was very worried about her and secretly loved her. He had embarked on a dangerous journey just so that she could become his wife in the future. But she agreed to marry him only after they could save her brother. But that wasn't enough for him, and he wanted to at least try to kiss her. Still, she refused and pushed him away. The night passed, the watch ended. Now they gathered all the necessary things left in the building and continued moving on in search of the lost boy. On their way, they encountered a huge number of mutants, which they constantly had to fight. Now they managed to descend into a basement where an abandoned car stood. The people checked it, and after ensuring it was safe, they decided to use it. They began loading all their things into the car, trying to seal the windows so the mutants couldn't get inside. Now with the car secured, they could try to start the engine. That wasn't all. Just in case, the man doused it with gasoline so that if needed, they could set the car on fire. Now everyone got inside the car, and the main character took the wheel. Jai was the only one who had to deal with the zombies in the car, so everyone trusted him. Now he started the engine and began to move. Very soon, he managed to break through the garage doors and find himself right outside. There were many mutants, and he began to crush them, not fearing that the car wouldn't hold up or get stuck. But with every passing minute, more and more mutants appeared. So he ordered his friend to set the car on fire. Now they were in a burning car, and the monsters feared the fire, so they didn't approach them. To stop the fire in the cabin, they used water, trying to extinguish the flames and prevent it from spreading. But they quickly realized that not all zombies were afraid of flames. Moreover, it was getting very hot in the car, and there was a lot of smoke, making it hard to breathe. The whole car was engulfed in flames, even the tires began to burn. They drove to the park, and now that they were there, they needed to urgently leave the car. But when they got out and started running, the car exploded because the fire reached the gas tank. They were incredibly lucky, as if they had waited just a few more seconds, they would have all died. On the map, they noticed that there was a huge lake in the park with many boats. The people thought it was a very safe place, as there were the fewest mutants in the water, and they didn't go into it. So each of them took a boat for themselves and started paddling away from the shore. This was the only place where people could relax and feel safe. On their way was a bridge which had many mutants. To prevent them from jumping on them, they had to shoot them down. Additionally, the dead were jumping right into their boat from the street. However, the people managed to overcome this threat. Ji remembered how long ago he had vacationed in this beautiful city with his family. He and his girls truly loved this place. There were always many people, and it was very beautiful. Ji missed the times when he and his loved ones could just relax and live. They fed the fish from the boat and laughed. He loved his family and wanted to spend a lot of time with them. But now he wanted to return to those wonderful times again. He watched the fish in the lake swimming by their boat, and now for him, it was food that was needed for survival. The people were very happy, as they understood that now they couldn't eat normal food, and fish on the table was a real salvation for them. But there was no time to waste, as they soon needed to reach the shore, where there were many mutants. First of all, they tried to clear a path for themselves to safely get to land and keep moving. But when they reached the shore, they had no idea what danger awaited them. At first, everything was very calm, and they didn't hear anything suspicious. To shorten their path, they decided to walk through the thick bushes. However, the people couldn't even imagine that a huge danger awaited them. Suddenly, a massive number of mutants charged at them. A real bloodbath began, and none of them expected there would be so many zombies. They started to surround the people and attack from all sides. One of them even managed to bite a girl on the arm. Now she realized that her journey had come to an end, as strange things began happening to her body. At times, another mutant tried to bite her arm, but at the last moment, someone shot it right in the face, saving the girl. To prevent the infection from spreading throughout her body, she had to take a desperate step. So, she cut off her own arm and tried to stop the bleeding while the others shielded her with their bodies. But the pain was so intense that she began to lose consciousness. She simply fell to the ground and couldn't continue fighting, so the people had to try to protect her. The guard picked her up on his shoulder because they couldn't just leave her there to die. Besides, there was still hope that she could survive. The people had to run. There were so many mutants that they couldn't handle them at all. The main character stopped to give the others a chance to escape to the nearest building. Now it was his turn. He started running, catching up to them. The monsters continued to pursue him. Jai was in heavy gear and had spent a lot of energy. We buy the spay energy, so they began to help him. The zombies approaching him grabbed his clothes and legs, pulling him down. After that, to stop them and save the main character, the people began to fight them off. Still, they managed to climb up, and everyone remained safe and sound. Moreover, the girl regained consciousness and was healthy and unharmed, although her arm hurt a lot. There were so many mutants that we couldn't build a human pyramid to reach them. So to stop them, the man had to use dynamite. A loud explosion rang out, and all the mutants nearby were wiped out. Moreover, part of this building was destroyed, and the floorboards barely avoided being buried under the rubble. But even though they managed to hold off the monsters for a while, more kept coming, and soon they would be able to reach them. So despite everything, people continued to flee from them, trying to find a new safe place. This new place was supposed to be the neighboring house, so they started climbing up. But the zombies were still hot on their heels. The girl realized she had become a burden to the others, so she wanted them to just leave her behind and not drag her along. But the guard, to whom she had promised to marry, kept saving her no matter what. He truly loved her and couldn't just abandon her. He knew she thought he was a freak and didn't like him. The main character tried to hurry him along, doing everything he could to make him move faster and not hold them back. But until he got his daughter and wife back, none of them were going to die. Now they had managed to reach the surface. This place was relatively safe, as they could take out all the mutants trying to get to them. However, there were so many that they couldn't hold them off for long. They were lucky because there was a TV tower on the building, and they tried to use it as a bridge to the other house. But knocking it down wasn't as easy as it seemed at first glance, since it was securely anchored to the ground and weighed several hundred pounds. Jai urged everyone to hurry because he wouldn't be able to hold out much longer. Still, Faye managed to shake the tower, and eventually the ground beneath it began to crack. To do this, he climbed to the 7th level, and the tower started to fall along with him. The man risked his life to give them a chance to escape, but he was incredibly lucky because he survived. Now they had a chance to reach the neighboring house and find safety. The mutants were still pursuing them. As many of them began to move toward them along the antenna, the men tried to knock it down. However, it was so heavy that they couldn't manage it, and the mutants were getting closer and closer. One of them even managed to touch the main character's face. He was about to bite him, but just at that moment, the antenna fell, and all the mutants on it tumbled down. Now they were safe, and it was time to take care of the injured and the affected. Phi was utterly exhausted. He missed the peaceful and calm life where he could just relax. His friend decided to support him so that he wouldn't give up and would keep moving forward. The girl could never have imagined that the man who saved her could be so attentive to her. He stayed close to her, constantly making sure she drank water, took her medicine, and felt okay. But he was a doctor by profession, so this was his job, and he loved it deeply. Still, she finally realized that the man truly loved her and was ready to die for her life, so she agreed to marry him once they returned home safely. Hearing this, he broke down in tears. He was sure they would make it home and was ready to do everything possible to ensure that. However, Jay understood that they had to leave. They couldn't stay in such a dangerous place. Suddenly, one of them refused to go. He wanted to stay. No one understood what was happening or why he chose to remain. But in reality, he could no longer be saved. The man was doomed. His hand had turned blue, and a deadly infection began to spread through his body. He wanted his family to know that he simply fell from a height, not that he had turned into a mutant. So when the others moved to the neighboring building, he stayed right where he was. For the last time, he looked at a photo of his family. It was their best picture together from a warm, sunny beach. Suddenly, the transformation began. The man started vomiting and was covered in blood. After that, he collapsed to the ground. And then, he finally began to change, becoming a mutant. Now he was one of the mutants attacking people and was a true killer. Finally, the group managed to reach a park swarming with mutants, and there were no tall buildings nearby. Now the men truly understood how important and complicated the operation they were about to undertake was. The main character was so overwhelmed that he had no words. He remained silent the entire time. But before moving on, the men decided to have breakfast and regain their strength. They were in a dangerous place, so they decided to cook the fish they had caught the day before in the lake. Jay was so anxious that he couldn't even eat. He turned down the food offered to him, yet he knew he needed to regain his strength and energy. But instead of eating for himself, he gave his piece to an injured girl sitting aside watching them. The group was near a department store which had access to an underground cave, as the mall and the basement were connected. Taking the underground streets around the square was a great idea, but inside there could be many locked doors, making it a big problem to get into the store and move from there to the basement. However, they had no other choice. They couldn't walk around the store outside because there were too many mutants. Without wasting any time, the men started moving, and the main character descended on a rope. While the others held him, he tried to break the glass to get inside the store. He was extremely nervous, not knowing what dangers awaited him inside the store. He also needed to cut through the metal grate that protected him. After that, they finally managed to get inside and were ready for anything. On their way, they found red doors that could lead them to a storage area filled with supplies, food, and water. Now they needed to try to break the lock. The main character succeeded, and now he found himself in a dark and cold room. Inside, there were tables laid out with a lot of cutlery. Finally, they realized they had entered the kitchenware department. However, they moved on and reached the area where clothes and many other valuable items were sold. But this was not at all what they were looking for, so they continued on. Finally, they managed to reach a place where there were truly valuable items. Many axes, ropes, climbing gear, and more. G started picking things out, and the first thing that caught his eye was a sharp axe. It looked very handy and sturdy. Moreover, it was very expensive, costing a whole $1,000. However, there was nothing else of value left in the store. His friends couldn't find anything for themselves. Meanwhile, the woman continued to examine the items. Her attention was drawn to a mannequin, specifically its plastic arm, which she could use as a prosthetic for herself. Now the group faced a new challenge. They needed to go down further, but the escalators weren't working. G led the way, carefully looking around and listening to every rustle. Suddenly, they entered a special section, and he spotted a ring. It reminded him of the past when he and his wife were preparing for their wedding. The ring on his beloved's finger was incredibly beautiful and suited her perfectly. He recalled how he promised to buy his wife a much better ring with a big diamond. Back then, she had cried because his goals seemed so far-fetched. But now he had this opportunity, yet he turned down such temptation and placed the ring back. Because he was convinced that a true gentleman should achieve his goals on his own. However, June thought differently. He decided to take the ring with him. The diamond in it was very strong, and it could help in a critical situation since it could cut glass. After that, they continued moving through the store. The main character was ahead, lighting the way for everyone with his flashlight. Up ahead, they saw the corpse of a person that was still fresh, as it hadn't started to decay. This meant they weren't the first people inside the store. They needed to be careful as danger lurked around. Suddenly, he stepped into a puddle of blood. Moreover, it was accompanied by a terrible smell. June was very familiar with it. It was the smell of rotting flesh. It could have been spoiled food, as zombies didn't smell that awful. Indeed, after a long corridor, the team entered the grocery section, where there was a lot of food and alcohol. Inside the refrigerator stood many bottles of wine and champagne. Strangely, they hadn't been looted by marauders. Additionally, there was a bag full of food lying on the ground, but no one had taken it. Moreover, there was a lot of fresh blood. It became clear that something was off about this place, so the group decided to leave quickly. But just as they were about to turn back, they realized it was too late. Somewhere in the distance, they heard a terrifying scream. It was the voice of hungry masters who began to surround them and were about to attack. Furthermore, they realized there were many mutants, and these were not ordinary zombies. Right in front of them was a huge barrier that separated them from another room in the store. The group began to approach it, as turning back was too risky and would take too long. They needed to try to open the metal barrier in front of them. This would allow them to move forward and shorten their path. But as soon as they started to get closer, the terrifying screams grew louder and more distinct. It seemed like they were cannibals, but there was plenty of food in the city, and there was no need to eat other people. Still, the group prepared and turned off the lights. They set up an ambush and waited for the enemies to come out to them. Now they had a clear plan, and none of them wanted to take risks, because they didn't know what threat awaited them ahead and what secrets the dark store held. The sounds grew louder. G realized that the mutants were nearby, and suddenly he saw one of them right behind the barrier they needed to go through. At that moment, he prepared for an attack, and as soon as the monster appeared in front of him, he shot it right in the head, trying to kill it. But it didn't help. The mutant didn't die, but became even angrier, and other zombies appeared, drawn by the sound of the gunshot. Another shot right in the head, but even that didn't kill the strong mutant. The battle continued and the other men also opened fire. However, even after that, the mutants didn't die. Even shots to the head didn't help. It became clear, zombies had evolved. They were becoming immune to human attacks. The only way to defeat them was to decapitate them. The men began to flee, as the barrier would soon break. However, there was another way to fight them, and that's what they wanted to test. For this, they needed a lot of alcohol, but fortunately, there was plenty on the store shelves. After the man found the required amount of alcohol, he began pouring it on the floor. Then, he used paper to ensure the mixture could be ignited and would burn well. Now, he needed to mix the alcohol content and use the paper to ignite the bottle. He had created a Molotov cocktail. Now, they were in a long maze of boxes and crates, not knowing from which side the zombies would attack them. But the metal grate was right in front of them, and Jai just waited for the mutants to break it and start attacking. After a while, he heard a characteristic sound. The gate opened. Now, a huge army of mutants was searching for them and was ready to attack and tear the people apart in a matter of minutes. These mutants were different from the others. They could think, so they began searching for the humans. To do this, they looked for traces and tried to catch the characteristic scent of human flesh. Jai understood that they would be found soon, so there was no time to waste, and he stepped out to face the mutants. When the zombies saw him, they started running straight for the people. But the men were ready for this. They ignited the cocktail and threw it right into the crowd. An explosion occurred, and a fierce fire broke out. As a result, the boxes and cardboard ignited, and the mutants began to burn. But that wasn't all. After the fire, to finish off the zombies, the group opened fire. They had a basket full of alcohol, and they sent it into the crowd of still living dead. Then, a shot. Another explosion rang out, much stronger than the previous one. Everything around burst into flames, and very soon the entire floor of the building was engulfed in fire. However, it wasn't that simple, because many mutants didn't die. Suddenly, one of them lunged at the main character and nearly hit him. G managed to dodge at the last moment. Despite the injuries, the monster remained alive and even attacked the people. The men began to fight, but the main character understood he needed to decapitate it, and that's what he tried to do. Meanwhile, they managed to open the security doors. It was their only chance to escape the burning room. So without hesitation, the group headed that way. But even there were many dangerous mutants that the doors didn't stop. This path was blocked, so they had to quickly turn back and close the door behind them. But suddenly, the noise stopped. It became very quiet. The people were frightened, as what could that mean? Suddenly, a powerful blow shattered the heavy metal doors. It was an axe. Now all the men together tried to block the door to prevent the mutants from breaking through and slaughtering them all. The zombies continued to smash the door, but it was securely blocked. This gave the men a little time, so they decided to head back. But there was no way back either, as the clothes began to burn, and due to the intense fire, they simply couldn't pass. Another possible escape was the entrance to the underground mall. But the doors there were also blocked, so the group tried to open them. With combined efforts, they managed to do it, and finally the passage opened. Now they needed to break through the metal grate. After a while, everything was ready, and the path to the dark underground tunnel opened up for them. They began to descend the stairs, but as soon as they started going lower, they realized everything was underwater. Now they found themselves knee-deep in water, and their movements slowed down. The water had started to accumulate because the store's plumbing wasn't working. Suddenly, they felt strong jolts and strange sounds. Those were doors that couldn't hold up. The mutants managed to push them open, so the people had to move as fast as they could. They started to run. At that moment, the zombies sensed their fear and began chasing after them. Now the men had to shoot at them to fend them off. The water ahead was getting deeper, so they needed to use inflatable rings to avoid drowning. In fact, the deep water became their salvation. Zombies couldn't swim, so they stopped. But not for long, because soon they started climbing the walls and were on their tails again. Moreover, they moved much faster than the people could swim. However, there was nowhere left to run, as they had reached a dead end with no way out. They had no choice but to dive into the water. One man held his breath and then dove in. Once they were underwater, they realized that surfacing was extremely dangerous, as zombies were already waiting for them above. They couldn't swim, so they didn't dive in with them. Holding their breath, the people tried to swim back and move in the opposite direction. This way, they could at least gain a little distance from them. To avoid suffocating, they breathed air from the inflatable rings, allowing them to stay underwater longer. Additionally, there were many mutants who had fallen into the water and couldn't swim. Along with that, There were many corpses of other people who had once hoped to find safety in the water, but had ended up in a dead end. Now they found themselves at the entrance to a dark corridor from which they had come. Only now, when they had distanced themselves enough from the zombies, could they take a breath. The people quickly began to climb the stairs. However, they couldn't relax, as the zombies could continue to chase them once they realized what had really happened. Now they managed to get into a fishing store. It was a place filled with nets and other equipment, exactly what they needed. It didn't take long for the mutants to catch their scent. They started chasing the people again, but now the men could use the nets to catch them. A few zombies got trapped and stuck, but others kept running. They had to fight them off. These mutants weren't ordinary, and even a blow to the head wouldn't stop them. The men defended each other, risking their lives when suddenly one of them got bitten. He saved the main character's life, but received a fatal wound. He was bitten on the arm. Yet he didn't stop and wasn't about to give up. The man bravely continued to fight, blow after blow. Still, he managed to turn back, and in the meantime, June arrived. He had found a motorcycle in the parking lot. In fact, his arm was protected by a huge number of watches, so he was unharmed. However, the monster didn't die. It got back on its feet and just watched the people. After that, it simply ran off in another direction. Very soon, a new monster appeared in its place, much stronger and larger. Moreover, it was armed and charged at the people right away. Together, they started fighting it. They needed to kill it as quickly as possible. But as soon as the people began to attack it, something strange happened. The mutant just ran away. For a moment, it became very quiet and calm. However, thinking that everything had settled down was a huge mistake. Suddenly, the walls of the store began to crack, as a massive number of zombies had rushed in, drawn by the scent of blood and the sounds of battle. They quickly flooded the entire store and began climbing right on top of the people. Hungry mutants were searching for their prey and were very ravenous. Now the people had to flee. They moved in an unknown direction, trying to shake off their pursuers. Ahead lay the motorcycle they had found earlier. With no other choice, they decided to set it on fire. The flames managed to slow the mutants down a bit. Luckily, they weren't like the others. They lacked intelligence. From the powerful explosion that went off, the people's clothes caught fire. Jai tried to extinguish the flames and wanted to save his friend. However, very soon the fire would die down, and the people had nowhere to run. Ahead stood the strongest and smartest mutant. It seemed to be their leader. They needed to escape urgently. Time was running out. As soon as the fire died down, the zombies began to chase them again. The people were lucky. They found an exit to the roof of the building, and the door was open. But what had happened to the city shocked them all. Buildings and entire neighborhoods were destroyed. There was no life. Now, the hope of finding the man and saving the main character's family seemed ghostly. However, there was no time to waste. Using whatever items they could find, they managed to barricade the door. Now they needed to get down from the roof and run. That's exactly what they did, and they started running. The people ran in an unknown direction, seeing only human corpses and ruins in their path. They tried to search the bodies of soldiers in hopes of finding weapons or other valuable items. They got lucky, as one of them found an assault rifle and a few rounds for it. But now the mutants broke through. They managed to open the door and were chasing the people again. Despite the fact that the people were constantly fleeing, they couldn't completely escape. They kept running, while a whole horde of zombies continued to pursue them. A woman felt very weak. She couldn't go on and wanted to stay behind. But her husband couldn't allow that. He agreed to carry her just so she wouldn't die. Ahead was a plane, which was their only chance for salvation. Its tail was high up, so it could be the only safe place for them. When the people made it to the surface, they started shooting. It wasn't enough. All they had left were a few bottles of alcohol, which they could also set on fire. To avoid catching fire themselves, they moved to the very end of the tail. After that, the fire began. Now the mutants didn't rush into the flames. They simply adopted the same tactic and waited for it all to end. G realized they wouldn't be able to leave until they tried to kill the main zombie. He understood that it was the one who kept finding them, while the other zombies just followed its lead. He had a gun, but the ammo didn't fit. They needed to take a risk and try to physically reduce their numbers to the right size. The worst happened as the main mutant began to extinguish the fire. Jai panicked. He had one last hope that this would work. If not, they would all inevitably die. Suddenly, a shot, then another, and another. He managed to hit the zombie right in the head, and it fell to the ground. For a long time, it showed no signs of life. and it seemed they had managed to kill it. However, that wasn't the case. The mutant was still alive. It became even angrier and started to rise to continue attacking the people. They needed to take a few more shots, but the shell got stuck and the man couldn't get it out. However, they tried to do it. They succeeded. They hit it right in the head, and it seemed this time they had killed it. But the flames would soon die down, and they had no idea what to do next. But the only way was up, to the tail of the plane. So one by one, they began to climb up, and from there they could start firing. When they reached the top, they could try to get to one of the neighboring buildings. From there, the distance wasn't too great, so they managed to reach one of the buildings. Now, when they had tied the rope, they could move on and escape from danger until the flames completely died down. The streets of the city were filled with mutants who didn't pay attention to the people moving above them. Suddenly, a human hand appeared on the ground. It was a bait, as a hungry mutant immediately reacted to it. Suddenly, the rope, it tightened as soon as the zombie stepped inside with its foot. In fact, it was a trap. Someone was trying to catch the mutant. A boy who lived in this part of the city had developed a special device to catch zombies. After that, he would bathe them, tie them up, and keep them as hostages. He also had a lot of clothes and carefully selected them for his captives. He even painted them. He wasn't scared at all that the mutants could bite him. Now he was meticulously preparing for a meeting with them, setting the table with food, candles, and flowers. In such times, it was the only chance not to lose his mind and have some fun. This girl who had turned into a mutant had liked him since elementary school, and all his life he had dreamed only of her. But she never paid him any attention. Every time he got too close to her, he would start to panic and blush. A few times he even had to run away. But one day he gathered the courage to talk to her and confessed how he felt. But when he realized he had said too much, he tried to fix it. As a result, he got so scared that he just broke down in tears. After that, he ran away again. Even as he got older, he still tried to win her attention. But then, suddenly, martial law was declared in the country. Many soldiers appeared on the streets, and now he couldn't see her as often. But even that didn't stop him. Every day he watched, and suddenly, he spotted her in a crowd of zombies. Now she was his target, the one he was trying to capture. Only now she would be by his side. Now he felt very sad. The boy couldn't even imagine that he would be sitting next to her in such an atmosphere. His heart ached, but he still loved her. He also wanted to feed her and shared a piece of his own food. The zombie began to eat. She was so greedy that she nearly bit his fingers off. However, that didn't scare the boy at all. After lunch, he turned on a movie. This movie made him cry every time he watched it. The mutant wanted to bite him. But instead of running away from her, the lovesick boy took a few photos. After that, he wanted to play a game with her. But when he turned on the TV, he heard a suspicious sound. Luckily, he had cameras that allowed him to see who it really was. Among the crowd of armed people, he saw a very familiar face. It was his sister. Meanwhile, the people found themselves in the neighboring building. Finally, they were safe. Now they needed to try to find the boy. On the roof, they saw something suspicious and realized it was him. In the meantime, the boy thought his sister had been taken hostage. He got so scared that he grabbed a weapon and ran out to the people. She was very happy to see him alive and stopped him when he wanted to start shooting. Now, he broke down in tears, realizing that his sister had sacrificed her own arm and risked her life to save him. He couldn't calm down, but he had already made his choice. In fact, he didn't want to go anywhere and planned to stay in his house. His sister didn't understand his behavior. The other men who had nearly died saving him were also very surprised. In fact, he had special reasons for wanting to stay. Very quickly, everyone understood what was really happening, as his captive managed to free herself and was now trying to attack the people. But when one of the men swung at her, the boy stopped him and shielded the zombie with his own body. He didn't think at all about the fact that the monster could bite him and kill him. Fortunately, that didn't happen. Jai managed to react and saved his life. The man grabbed the mutant and threw it away from him. After that, his sister struck and killed the creature, cleaving its head in two. The poor guy just couldn't accept this loss, so he rushed to her lifeless body. Despite her being a mutant, he loved her and wanted to stay. However, G knew there were many other people in the house, but now they had all vanished. In the old house, there were people who served his father, and when the epidemic started, they all banded together to work as a team. The boy became their leader because he discovered a stash of food, quickly winning their favor. But things didn't go as he thought right away, because he himself had to become an outcast. People took everything from him. He had to flee just to stay alive. But then he grew tired of that life, so he decided to fight, no matter what. He had to kill everyone just to survive. Each of them wanted him dead. However, time was running out, so the boy gathered all the food and supplies he had and decided to leave with them. But new mutants appeared on the street, starting to attack them. They had to fight back, so the people battled. When the threat was eliminated, they could continue moving forward. The boy knew the area well, so he led them to a military supply store. There was a ton of powerful weapons, ammo, and gear. After that, they looted a few abandoned vans in hopes of finding more valuable resources or weapons. They got lucky and found a van filled with gasoline. The men began checking it out. Everything was intact, but they needed to prepare the vehicle for a zombie encounter. As before, they planned to cover the vulnerable spots with mattresses and blankets. They also wanted to camouflage it and tried to load all the gear they could find inside. After that, they could head home. They opened the gates, but there were so many zombies that hope of getting through was almost gone. However, the mutants ran past, and none of them paid attention to the vehicle just sitting in the middle of the street. They waited for the mutants to calm down and stop. And when that happened, he started to drive out as slowly as he could. They managed to move slowly but surely. Moreover, they tried to move very carefully so as not to accidentally crush anyone or make noise. Did they really make it? They drove through the city streets, avoiding all the mutants in their path. The driver was so nervous that his legs were shaking. It was crucial to do everything carefully and correctly. But there were so many mutants around that the road was blocked, and they couldn't move any further. Suddenly, Faye cautiously peeked out of the car and took a shot, then another, and several shots fell at the feet of the mutants. One of them had a phone attached with a timer. When it started ringing, all the mutants ran toward the noise. Now the road was clear of mutants, and the people began to move forward. The man carefully pressed the gas, and the car rolled down the city street. Now he was going to do the same to try to distract the mutants that had gathered and blocked their path. Thus, they slowly but surely drove down the city street, getting closer to salvation. Now the boy confessed why he had really left his father. His old man had always been good to him, but treated others poorly. He wanted to apologize to his friends for him and for the fact that they had to risk their lives. Now they had to survive in the time of the greatest catastrophe that had ever befallen humanity. And the people under his father's rule were those who couldn't find his weaknesses and continued to live in fear. And what they were doing now was merely following a dangerous order. But now they were all in the same boat, and their survival depended solely on working together. Suddenly, the car came to a screeching halt. In fact, he had run over a corpse and it fell to the ground. Now he was so scared that his heart nearly stopped. Immediately, the zombies began to roar and attack the car. Mutants surrounded it from all sides, trying to smash the glass to get inside. With all his might, he pressed the gas to break through, and he started crushing all the mutants in his path. Now they needed to push through. At high speed, the car became uncontrollable, so the main character helped steer to keep them from veering off the road. Now they were passing under a bridge, and the mutants on it could jump onto the car. And that's exactly what happened. Now they could get inside through the hatch on the roof. To stop them, Faye tried to climb onto the roof. From there, he began shooting at the mutants closing in on them. He shot the last one right in the head, causing its skull to explode into tiny pieces. There were no more mutants on the roof. But the further they moved down the street, the more mutants there were. So now he needed to fry them. From time to time, he threw cocktails at them, causing a massive number of zombies to catch fire. However, he quickly ran out of supplies, and now they were practically defenseless. The only hope was that the car wouldn't stop. However, now they had significantly slowed down. There were so many mutants that they couldn't break through. Because of this, the man tried to do everything possible to keep them moving, even at a slower speed. After all, if the car stopped, they would be doomed. Faye continued to sit on the roof, shooting at anyone who approached them. But very soon, he would run out of ammo. There were so many zombies that he could no longer keep it up. He had to climb back inside. The mutants surrounded the car and tried to flip it over. Now the people were stuck. The engine stalled, and they couldn't get it started again. Suddenly, the car began to tip over. There were so many mutants that they could easily do it all together. They were lucky because the vehicle was armored. They could hold out like this for a while, but they needed to rest. While the others slept, someone had to keep watch, and the rookie wanted to be the first to do it. But no one trusted him, so June was the first to stay on guard. Everyone else was asleep, and now they had to think about how to escape this deadly trap. Meanwhile, everything was calm at the house of his father. None of the people knew if the main character would return alive and save the main son. However, they needed to take care of his family. At that moment, they were being brought food. But the girl didn't want to eat anything. The food they gave her was tasteless. Besides, she was used to her mom cooking, and she didn't want anything but her food. Moreover, she didn't like the suspicious woman. However, in the end, she left the food and walked away, fearing she might get angry and lash out at them. After her, Uncle Wu came into the room and brought rice buns. That was exactly what Kier liked. So she started eating. And the man was pleased, talking about how hard it was to get such food in their times. Then he promised to give her as much as she wanted, on the condition that she would just go with him. But the woman kicked him out, even smashing a plate over his head. She wouldn't be accepting such gifts from him anymore. Silently, he turned away and began cleaning up the shards of glass. After that, they quietly left their room and walked away. Feng Yun was so scared that she started crying and trembling. All the while, she held a piece of sharp glass in her hand, which had cut her, but she was ready to fight and defend herself if necessary. At night, the man returned. He hoped the women were asleep and wanted to sneak into the room very quietly so as not to wake them. Wu began to approach her bed, but he didn't notice that Feng Yun wasn't there. She wasn't sleeping. She was waiting for him to return. And now she struck and wounded him with the sharp piece of glass right in the chest. His body began to bleed, but she kept hitting him. Wu couldn't handle her, plus he had received many wounds. He begged for mercy, but she didn't stop. Feng Yun kept cutting him, and then he began to scream and call for help. Feng Yun wasn't even going to let him go, so she just covered his mouth and kept hitting him until he died and stopped breathing. Finally, he stopped resisting. The whole room was covered in blood. Feng Yun looked at his dead body and realized that now she would have big problems. But she did it for her own protection. Together with her daughter, they began packing food and all their things. She had been preparing to flee for a long time. She knew that the body of the dead man had already been found, so she tried to leave the house and escape as quickly as possible. But they were already being searched for, and panic began among the workers. She hid, but one of the workers noticed her and found her. After what happened, she was taken to the boss, who tried to make them talk, but the girls remained silent. They also brought in another woman, who instead of feeding them buns, gave the girls slop. As it turned out, she was taking the best food for herself, just like Wu did, because remnants of food were found in his stomach. After everyone learned the truth, she was taken away and promised to be thrown to the mutants as food. The old man offered the woman to stay and live in his house, as he didn't believe in her husband's return. But she didn't believe that and planned to wait for him as long as it took. Meanwhile, his parents were sitting in the new house. They were also waiting for their son's return, as they hadn't heard any news from him for a long time. Soon they would also run out of food and supplies, so they weren't eating properly. They also knew that the zombie king had disappeared, and most likely, he had gone in search of his son Jai. Trouble was waiting for them. Meanwhile, the people had to sit in the car until dawn. It was very hot inside, but they noticed that there weren't many zombies left outside. But the woman felt very unwell. She couldn't even speak. In fact, she needed to use the bathroom, but she had to hold it in because they couldn't get out of the car. The men offered her a bucket, and they turned away so she could do it properly. Each of them was planning to do the same, as they had been sitting in the car for a long time, and everyone needed to use the bathroom. However, the main character remained very serious. He wanted to try to flip the car back onto its wheels so they could drive away and escape alive. But to do that, they needed to go outside, which was too risky. However, there was space between the car and the road, and they could use it to try to push off. They were still a few kilometers from the nearest bay, and covering that distance on foot would be very dangerous. And when a new wave of zombies appeared, they would just park the car against the wall to avoid being flipped again. Now Ji began preparing to implement his new plan. He needed to push a special inflatable wheel to start pumping it up. When everything was ready, he began to pump. Surprisingly, everything started going just as he thought it would. The others were thrilled when they realized they had a new hope for salvation. So now everyone took turns helping the hero. Slowly their vehicle began to rise. In addition, they needed to try to rock the car. So on the count of 3, they all ran to the other side of the van, trying to shake it. It started to work, but the first push wasn't enough. However, on another attempt, they succeeded, and now they were on wheels and could keep moving. With all his strength, the man slammed on the brakes. They made a lot of noise, and the zombies couldn't help but notice. While there weren't too many of them yet, the men needed to escape. Suddenly, one of the mutants got a face full of a bag of urine. Before long, their car was surrounded. Now the men had to slow down again. They had to wait for the wave of zombies to die down before moving on. But this time it wasn't as easy as before, because much stronger mutants appeared, armed and trying to smash the windows. With each heavy blow, the windshield started to crack, and now the people were in danger. It turned out these zombies were much smarter than the ones they had seen before. The main character grabbed his weapon and waited. He pushed the barrel through a crack and fired, hitting the strongest of the mutants trying to attack the car. Now they needed to start the car and try to move on. They also had to get rid of the zombies on the roof who posed a threat and could get inside. The guys got to work. They shot at the zombies and tried to break free from the deadly trap. They also tried to rock the car, shifting gears to crush the mutants and knock them off their feet. However, that wasn't enough, and Jai decided to take a desperate step. He left the car and tried to run to distract the undead. It worked as they started chasing him. At the same time, the car could move. To avoid being chased, he had to climb onto a building. He got lucky as one of the apartment windows was open. He took advantage of that and quickly climbed inside. However, he didn't rush as he didn't know what danger awaited him inside. In fact, it was empty, and he let out a sigh of relief. The house was filled with a lot of stuff, so he could use it for his own purposes. He tried to move heavy furniture closer to the window. After that, he smashed the glass and started throwing things out onto the street. This way, he managed to crush a large number of zombies that were blocking the car's path outside. The noise from the falling debris caught the attention of others. So with each throw, he was able to take out even more new mutants. His plan worked, but now he faced another danger. How would he get back and catch up with everyone else? Taking advantage of the situation, the others started hitting the brakes, and the car took off. Jai didn't relax and kept searching. He found some fabric that he wanted to set on fire, so he applied a special wax that could easily ignite. After that, he gathered other flammable materials he could find in the house, and he threw them right into the huge crowd of mutants. Now it was time to light it up, and he did. The massive crowd of mutants ignited, and he was satisfied that he managed to do it. When the people got to a safe distance, they stopped and wanted to try to contact the main character. G started catching up with them, and when he was close, they opened the hatch and let him inside. Now, they began to drive as fast as they could. They needed to reach the shore as quickly as possible because it was the only place that would lead them to safety. There were a lot of zombies outside, and it was hard to drive the car. But they managed to do it, and they found themselves just a few meters from the shore. To get into the water faster, they had to take a risk, so they crashed through the fence. Now their car was in the water. Before it sank completely, they managed to surface and were preparing to switch to the inflatable boat they had been carrying all along. When everything was ready, the people started to paddle. But even now, the monsters were chasing them, moving along the shore without entering the water. Now they managed to get closer to the bridge. There they stopped. The men wanted to wait until nightfall to hide from the zombies. And when it got dark, they could continue paddling. All the zombies waiting on the bridge left, and now they could peacefully float down the river. But when they got closer to the factory, G grabbed his weapon. His friends did the same and surrounded the girl and the man who was protecting her. He wanted them to go home and tell the owner that the job was done. They had no choice, so the guard took her with him and left. Meanwhile, the main character and his friends watched what was happening. Faye also had to return to find her father and tell him to send a few people after them just in case. In the meantime, the woman managed to reach her father's house. However, her brother stayed with the men, and it was him that the man kept a close eye on. He was overjoyed to see that his son was alive and well. Now they were ready for the deal. The old man wanted to start quickly to get his son back and not make him wait so long. So it began, and two people paddled toward the main character. With them was Feng Yun and his daughter. The boy was thrown into the water and forced to swim toward his father. He did, and on the shore he was met by guards who helped him up. Meanwhile, a man approached the main character, informing him that his son was safe. He suggested they start chasing the woman and abandon the deal. But the man refused, fearing he would be killed, knowing Jai was nearby and preparing to shoot. So he ordered everyone to retreat and go home. But when the woman got on the boat, she didn't see her husband there and got very scared. However, her friends supported her and said he would return soon. Meanwhile, the main character started making his way back. Finally, they reunited and could go home. For the first time in a long while, they all gathered together and sat at one table. Only now did they feel like normal people because they had real food and water. Moreover, the men brought supplies that the old man promised to give in exchange for his son's return. So now they could eat as much as they wanted. However, they couldn't forget the price they paid for this victory, as the men had nearly lost their lives. Furthermore, on the island, there were different survival rules, and there was a threat that others would try to take their food. Despite the scale of the disaster, there were still people in the city fighting for survival. They could pose a threat to others. However, they could try to connect with them and work together for survival. The quarantine in their country couldn't contain the situation, and it was unknown whether other cities in the country suffered as badly as their capital. However, none of them knew what the situation was like in other regions of the country and how bad things were. Meanwhile, Feng Yun didn't know what had happened to her parents, as all contact with them had been lost. Jai couldn't bear to see her cry. He felt bad that her parents couldn't be found. Other people asked him what he thought about the situation in the country. He was the only one who had seen zombies up close and fought them, so only he could know what to expect next. However, the news reported that infection cases were not only in their country, but worldwide. This indicated that the situation could be much worse, but they weren't receiving news from the outside world. In their house, there was a radio, and they could try to catch a signal. Moreover, during their journey, Jai realized that the zombies were becoming more dangerous. Many of them could think and had intelligence, making it much harder to fight them than the others. The man even came up with his own name for them, because these creatures were vastly different. It seemed they were monsters that had gained knowledge. The basic intelligence they possessed likely came from the outside world, but they still fed on and hunted people. During his journey, he managed to encounter a few of them. The main zombie had a very high level of intelligence, and it was very difficult to fight against beings like him, because even the mutants could learn, and that seemed almost fantastical. Moreover, they were much stronger than other zombies and had mutated so much that killing them wasn't as easy as the others. People were scared, as it seemed that at this rate, all zombies could evolve and become much stronger. Then, everyone would be in deadly danger. Jai tried to calm them down, as despite how terrifying the zombies were, the people were safe and in a secure place. However, the house needed repairs. Now they were all one family and had to work as a whole. Suddenly, the man managed to find a radio that was broadcasting some kind of Chinese announcement live. The government was asking citizens to take care of themselves and their families during the pandemic, as times were very tough right now. People were urged to look out for one another and, if possible, not to leave safe spaces. The virus was very dangerous, especially since there were dozens of other strains of the same deadly virus that spread through the air and constantly mutated. People needed to try to grow food in their own homes and stock up on enough water. Those who could survive in coastal areas would be able to receive shelter from the government and necessary supplies. People living deeper in the country had to survive on their own and seek supplies by their own means. Then, the announcement talked about knowledge and self-defense skills that might be needed on the streets and in battles against the undead. Not far from them was an island, and the main character had been there several times on vacation with his family. Moreover, there were few people there, and it was truly beautiful. But now they were very far from there, and going there was too dangerous. No one knew if they had the strength to reach the island, where it might be safe. However, the hero believed they needed a backup plan, even though they currently had plenty of food. As before, there were many problems, and sooner or later, food and even water could run out. He was convinced they needed to go, but not now. At that moment, they needed to think about defense and how to protect themselves from attacks by other people. Moreover, getting to the sea was very difficult because they had no transportation. Traveling the road was very hard, as the last trip showed that there were many mutants blocking the car. There was another good idea that he thought might work, as they could try to reach the sea via the river, but they needed a boat for that. They could try to find one on the nearest coast or build one themselves. This idea appealed to everyone, and technically, it should work. Other people listened closely to the broadcast, trying to understand when the virus outbreak occurred. There were many theories about it, and they thought the quarantine was intentionally prolonged to let more people suffer. However, now the signal was gradually improving, and finally they could turn on the radio and listen to it constantly. That evening, work began, and the house was very loud. All the men worked to improve their shelter and make it stronger. But it wasn't easy, as they had to work a lot both day and night. But that didn't scare any of them, and they tried to turn their house into a real fortress. They started building new walls. They also tried to seal all the windows so that no one could get inside through them. Everyone worked very hard and diligently, so in just a few days, everything was ready. Now the windows didn't pose such a big threat to them. Additionally, they began constructing a special metal frame that would serve as reliable protection for their home. Furthermore, with the leftover metal, they built a cage. The men wanted to use it to capture prisoners. But construction continued, and they started building new structures. Everyone did everything they could, and they worked for a common goal. The thirst for survival united them all, so everyone was motivated and did their best. Moreover, the men took care of the plants growing on their roof. There were potatoes and many others they managed to plant. This task was not easy, as the plants needed constant care and watering. One day, while the man was tending to the plants, he heard a strange sound coming from behind him. As it turned out, he was trying to break into their base using a rope. He threw it over from a neighboring building and attempted to climb across the rope to their roof. The unknown man was doing this very poorly, as he quickly gave himself away by making too much noise. He almost made it to their house, but the men were ready to greet him. They armed themselves and said hello before grabbing him. Faye was so furious that he nearly killed him on the spot, but he realized the man could be useful since they could interrogate him. So they took him inside their house and tied him up, trying to gather more information. The man revealed that they caught him while he was trying to sneak onto their territory through the roof. The main character watched him closely, trying to figure out who this stranger really was. She tried to get him to talk, but he remained silent and didn't utter a word. Now the men had no choice but to resort to force and retrieve their weapons, which they did. Finally, he promised to kill him if he didn't spill any information. Moreover, he recognized this kid as someone he had saved in the past. The kid was one of the cannibals who had killed their people before, and he had saved him twice. When Faye realized who this kid was, he started to beat him. Strangely enough, the kid began to laugh, seemingly unafraid at all. He didn't believe the main character was capable of this and could actually kill him, because he hadn't done it before. His words made the man pause. The kid warned that they would come for him in the evening, so the men needed to prepare for a new fight against much stronger enemies. No one believed him, as his people had lost last time, and it seemed they had no strength left for another attack. But in reality, they were much more numerous than it appeared, and they had firearms and armor. The main character tried to understand him, thinking he was just trying to scare them. However, he knew that the cannibals robbed and killed everyone around, and there was no doubt they planned to do the same to them. The kid could have escaped from them long ago, but he had nowhere to go, so he was stuck and didn't know what to do. Many of the people believed him and thought the kid really wanted to change and become a normal person. G wanted to learn much more about the cannibals and asked the kid to tell everything he knew. Since their leader died, they had been left to their own devices and did whatever they pleased. Their camp was planning real chaos and food was running out. He also shared their tactics for attacking them, which allowed the people to understand everything and prepare. The main character, although he didn't believe his words, decided to play it safe and prepare for battle. That same evening, just as the kid said, everything began. The enemy attack started right at the time he mentioned. As was already known, they used hooks to launch their assault. Everything went according to plan, and it seemed the kid was indeed telling the truth. It was fortunate because it was very visible outside. But time passed, and when the hooks were thrown, no one came, and the enemies didn't appear. Were they deceived? And was the kid just using them again to gain their trust? But the man didn't rush. A lot of time passed, and the people grew tired of waiting for the enemies to show up. They spent all that time on the roof of the house, waiting for an attack, but nothing happened. Hours passed since the hooks appeared on the roof, but still nothing occurred. Just as the men were about to head back inside, everything began, and the enemies started climbing towards them. There were so many of them that it became frightening, and it was unclear how they could possibly defeat them. Now it was clear that a confrontation was unavoidable, and they had to fight. A battle broke out among the men, and they needed to detach the hooks before the enemies reached the roof. That's exactly what they did, causing many enemies to fall to the ground, where they were devoured by zombies. Gunshots rang out as the enemies opened fire on them. But the people managed to prepare for this as well, using metal shields. Additionally, they tried to counterattack. But at that moment, the enemies began using fire, which was a very deadly and effective weapon. The women quickly tried to extinguish the flames so the men wouldn't get burned. The people held a solid defense, waiting for the enemies to come to them. When they tried to do this, they simply shot them in the face. Others were easily killed with cold weapons, smashing their heads in. Because they had prepared well, none of them were injured, and everyone remained alive. Everyone who could hold a weapon tried to fight and do everything possible to win this battle. Even the elderly, who couldn't fight, tried to detach the hooks. The strongest stood at the front, while the weakest supported them from behind. This tactic proved very effective, as the enemies suffered massive losses and couldn't even reach their house. The strongest moved forward, and they were the ones who suffered the most casualties. Suddenly, Faye was injured. He immediately received medical attention while the others covered him. Then the most interesting part of the operation began. While the enemies were preoccupied with the battle and trying to get into the neighboring house, the main character, along with the strongest men, managed to surround them and attack from behind. Now the enemies found themselves in deadly danger. Jai and the others began shooting them in the back, killing everyone in their path. They killed everyone and spared no one. They didn't need prisoners, so they acted quickly and coldly. They had the best weapons, the best protection, and plenty of ammunition. However, the main character hesitated. He couldn't bring himself to kill women and children. When one of them tried to plead with him, he was ready to do it. The girl dropped to her knees and begged him not to do it. Still, they didn't kill everyone. They planned to take a few of them prisoner. Faye was the only one injured, but he was very lucky because his injury wasn't serious. In total, they took a few prisoners, while the others were dead. But what should they do with the prisoners? Wouldn't it be easier to just kill them and make the women work? But this idea didn't sit well with the main character and his friend. So they decided to make the decision themselves and determine their fate. Despite being prisoners, they deserved only death for what they had done in the past. And they were ready to kill each of them for their past actions. This decision was not easy for him, but he understood it was necessary. There wasn't enough food to feed the prisoners, so he ordered them all to be killed. After that, they simply tossed them off the roof. And on the ground, zombies were already waiting for them, devouring them all and tearing them apart. The next day, the people lived their ordinary lives in a city crawling with mutants. Those who could tended to the vegetables, while others built fortifications. June went fishing because he really wanted to eat some decent food and meat. He managed to catch a fat fish and was satisfied. After a successful hunt, he decided to head back. In fact, he brought food for his injured friend, as he wanted him to recover quickly. Seeing this, the man was overjoyed as he loved that food and was grateful for such a gift. But he was also very upset that he had become incapacitated for a while. He felt bad that he was being cared for like a little child. Although, on the other hand, he understood it was necessary and no one wanted to risk his life. Meanwhile, the main character set off on a special mission. He personally tried to explore the city and find a way to save his team. And when no one was watching, he simply cried, as only he knew how hard it really was for him and how much effort he put in to make sure everyone was okay. He remembered how he and his wife constantly fought because he was away from home for so long, trying to make her life better. She always yelled at him for being irresponsible and didn't understand how hard he was trying for her sake. But now he felt a deep sadness that his family was suffering and living in such a terrible time. At that moment, he decided to change everything and promised to do everything he could to get them out of this city. The man didn't want to stop at what he had achieved and tried to do much more for them, so he set off on his journey. Along the way, he constantly recalled their arguments and how he hurt his loved one. He loved her deeply and was ready to give his life for her. Even more so, he loved his daughter, for whom he always wanted to be the perfect father. Lost in his thoughts, he completely let his guard down. And at that moment, he realized the ground beneath his feet began to crumble. He stepped on a fragile piece of the roof and fell through. In fact, he fell into a trap and found himself right in the heart of the enemy camp. The enemies, who were cannibals, wanted to kill him. But at the last moment, he managed to shoot an enemy who was trying to strike him. However, there were many more, and another one hit him right in the head. The man lost consciousness. His eyes closed, and for a while he could only hear the voices around him. The voices commented on how good he looked and how strong his body was. They were genuinely pleased with their catch and couldn't wait to taste his flesh. These were the cannibals who were planning to eat him. Suddenly, he saw events from his childhood. At that moment, he was a little boy living a carefree life, and one morning his sister woke him up. He remembered how they ate seaweed together. She also offered him water, but even that didn't help, because he was still very hungry. They decided to go to the store to get something to eat. The girl gave him everything and asked for nothing in return. She lied that she wasn't hungry. That morning, he felt very sick, and she tried to heal him. His parents weren't around, so she was the only one who took care of him. At that moment, they were truly happy, even living on the edge of poverty. Their parents couldn't afford to buy decent food, so the children tried to earn money to survive. They had to drink water mixed with salt. This food was very unappetizing. However, they had no other choice. The little boy liked it, and he was ready to drink it all the time, because it was the only thing that helped him not feel hungry. It was that day when he drank so much that he felt sick again. He felt very bad and wanted to ask for help, but it didn't help. His stomach hurt so much. And that was when he lost consciousness for the first time in his life. His sister thought he had died and began to cry. In the future, they were always together, But as his sister grew older, she didn't pay as much attention to him as she used to. He also had an older brother, with whom he didn't have a good relationship. The older brother didn't take him along because he thought he was a bore. However, one day everything changed. Because the boy came home to take the little one with him, he felt sorry for his younger brother, who was always left home alone. Their parents were gone, so he was very lonely and scared. For the first time, he took him along to swim with the other older boys. As it turned out, they were not far from the same island they were now trying to reach. So, to show his younger brother, the older one took him along and started to swim. They had to hold on tight because there was a very strong current, and the little one couldn't swim, risking drowning. Immediately, they began to swim. They quickly found themselves in the middle of an island located on the river outside the city. This island was a true urban legend, so there were many eager to visit it. However, there was one very interesting detail that immediately caught his attention and would stick with him for life. There were a lot of leeches there, which were dangerous to people. They managed to find one of them. He was curious to learn more about it, as he had never seen anything like it before. They crawled out to latch onto a person and suck their blood. His sister had grown up, but he still spent a lot of time with her. She took care of him, and it was clear how tired she was. She took him to school and truly managed to replace their mother. He had to work odd jobs and take exams for other people. Their parents had lost their jobs, and they had no money. His older brother worked all year so they could survive and have at least a little money for food. The little one didn't need to worry, as he considered himself grown up enough to help earn money. But one day, something changed. He, along with his family and brother, went to the river and found themselves in a very difficult situation. His family started to drown, but his brother, who jumped in to save them, also found himself in danger and began to sink. Now he had to choose whom to save. He had never faced such a difficult decision in his life. He loved his brother dearly, but even more he loved his wife and child. The man cried. Now he saw again the vision he had experienced many years ago in terrifying nightmares. His loved ones and others who had died were pleading for him to save them. Now they were being taken by zombies, all because of the epidemic. The man hated himself for not being able to turn back time and save his brother and sister. He loved them, as they had replaced his parents. But now he was left alone in a cruel world, and he needed to fight. Jai promised to kill everyone involved in the death of his loved ones and who had caused him harm. Suddenly, he woke up. The dream had been so horrifying that he simply couldn't sleep. Now he realized he was in an unfamiliar city. His hands were tied, and he needed to find a way to escape. In the room with him were many other people who were also prisoners and had been brutally tortured. He tried to get up and approach his neighbor, who wasn't showing any signs of life. He had been so badly mutilated that he had lost his legs and couldn't move on his own. Additionally, his body was being injected with some unknown substances. He was mumbling incoherent words, and it was impossible to understand what he really wanted. Ji leaned over him to try to make sense of his speech. As it turned out, the man was begging for help because his children were waiting for him at home and were hungry. Now he needed to come up with a plan and a way to get out of there alive. The stone walls were too thick, so he wouldn't be able to break through them. But in a dark corner of the room, there was something else, much more horrifying than the sickly invalid. Approaching it, he saw a zombie that began to scream and roar. It was tied up, sitting in a chair, and was constantly trying to free itself. Moreover, it had been there for several days and was very hungry. Its chair was securely bolted to the floor with metal nuts, so it couldn't break free. It seemed that the zombie had once been a person who had fallen into captivity. The creature was gnashing its teeth. It seemed to be trying to show or say something. However, it was obvious that it had no intelligence. The hero threw a wooden plank into its mouth, and it immediately devoured it. Yet it remained hungry as drool was dripping from its mouth. Suddenly, Jai noticed something very interesting on the floor. He had to lean down to get a better look and understand what it really was. As it turned out, they were shards of glass scattered across the floor beneath his chair. He managed to grab one of them, and this could be the key to his escape. But just as he was about to cut the rope, he noticed someone entering the room. He saw an unknown figure standing behind a metal barrier, but due to the poor lighting, he couldn't tell who it was. A thug entered, holding a knife and looking very aggressive. He accused the protagonist of killing his leader. After that, he delivered a powerful blow to his stomach. Then he didn't stop and continued to beat him even harder. Another punch to the stomach, this time much stronger. The man found himself on the ground, and the thug kept kicking him. Now he grabbed him by the hair and tried to lift him up. He promised to treat him just like a bedridden patient. He was going to chop him into pieces and make him die very slowly. Another blow and he pulled out his hair. But he was going to give the man one chance if he begged properly, wanting the protagonist to tell him his story. In response, Jai just laughed. He wasn't going to give up so easily and was ready to endure and fight until the very end. Another blow so strong that anyone else in his place would have already given up. The thug promised to give him one last chance and began to threaten him. He was going to kill him right there. But the hero was not like everyone else. He didn't even want to listen and knew he wouldn't be killed immediately. The beating continued. Despite the man constantly threatening him, he understood that he couldn't just beat this prisoner. It seemed Jai had seen him before. He began to talk about his wife and other people he had simply eaten, as he was a cannibal. Now the enemy was truly enraged. He grabbed the knife and really wanted to cut his throat, but he was stopped by a large woman who entered his cell. She admired how brave the man was and how fearlessly he stared death in the face. Now he was pondering, realizing that they were about to try to torture him. However, the woman approached the mutant with pieces of human flesh. She tried to feed him, and he ate everything she gave him. Now it was the protagonist's turn, and she was also going to feed him. She referred to all her prisoners as family, and even if one of them turned into a zombie, they still continued to watch over and care for them. But her idea of family was misguided. She also didn't notice how badly the protagonist had been beaten, as his face was covered in bruises and injuries. She tried to calm him down and promised that he wouldn't be killed because there were other plans for him. However, the man had one question. He wanted to know what had made them become cannibals and why they chose this path. But in reality, she didn't see her actions as anything wrong because they were just trying to survive, like everyone else. However, they could simply grow plants and stock up. What really made them start eating people? But they weren't farmers and had never known how to grow plants properly. They allowed themselves to harm other people, kill families, and eat them. In fact, they considered it a true struggle for survival and believed that only the strong had the right to live in such a world. But how would they feel if they were in the place of those people they kidnapped? The enemy replied calmly, saying that in such a situation he would simply accept it. Moreover, he still wanted to kill him because he was very hungry. But his colleague thought that the protagonist wasn't open enough and that more time was needed for him to speak. She tried to convince him and make him talk because she wanted to gather information about the other people living with him. But the man remained silent, so she had to just leave. Suddenly, he stopped her because their conversation wasn't finished. Now he got up and simply grabbed her by the hair. After she was on the ground, he ran toward his enemy and tried to kill him. But he had a knife. With the first strike, he managed to dodge, and the enemy missed. Now they were on the ground and began to fight. At the last moment, when the knife nearly pierced Jai, an old sick man who had been waiting for his time came to the rescue. With all his strength, he bit the thug's hand, the one holding the knife. After that, he jumped onto his neck and tried to throw him off. In the horrific struggle, the enemy began to bite him, managing to bite off a finger from the old man. But he didn't stop and kept biting even more. Now, in the heat of battle, Ji took the knife from him and freed himself. The advantage was on his side, and now he could kill his tormentor with his own weapon. Moreover, he saw that the woman had fallen right onto the monster, and he began to bite her. Now she was infected with a deadly disease and would soon also turn into a mutant. The zombie gnawed at her thick neck. After that, her lifeless body fell at his feet. But suddenly, she began to rise. Now she had become the same kind of mutant as he was and was ready to tear apart anyone in her path. Ji wasn't scared. He was just ready for anything. And he cut off her head. Now all his enemies were dead. He killed the mutant that had tried to attack him. He lifted the poor man who had saved his life, as without the old man, it was unclear how their confrontation would have ended. After that, he tied up the living enemy because he didn't want to kill him. Such a death would be too easy for him. He began to cut into his body with the sharp piece of glass, inflicting incredible pain. After that, he beat him, just like he had done to him. Blow after blow, but Ji didn't stop. And when the thug lost consciousness, he left, leaving him in the cell. Now he found himself in enemy territory and moved cautiously through the building. He heard many voices of other people and tried to reach the roof of the building to attempt an escape. In one of the rooms, he saw a woman who was armed and holding a shotgun. He managed to eavesdrop on their conversation and learned that they were planning to attack other groups of people hiding nearby. So they were trying to find new resources for themselves because they were dwindling day by day. Suddenly, another man came out of the neighboring room, noticing that the people who had gone to the pantry for the prisoners hadn't returned for a long time. He became curious about what had happened and really wanted to check what was going on. But as soon as he said this, the protagonist attacked him. He could no longer hesitate and used his body to shield himself from the bullets. The frightened woman began to shoot, but instead of killing the protagonist, she just shot her partner. When he got closer to her, he did the same and simply took her weapon. Now he had a gun and ammunition for it. He moved through the building, searching every room in his path, and he killed everyone he saw. He didn't need any prisoners. The dead bodies of his enemies lay on the stairs and in other rooms. They tried to escape, but couldn't save themselves. He didn't stop and kept moving, looking for valuable items in the house. Suddenly, he managed to find a barrel that had a lot of water in it. Now he could drink to his heart's content. Moreover, he decided to wash off all the dirt and blood that had covered his body. After he cleaned himself up, he planned to return to his prisoner. The beaten man had already regained his senses and was trying to crawl. But Jai stopped him right at the exit of the cage. He grabbed him by the hair and threw him back. Now that he started pulling his hair out, just like they had done to him. He kept repeating the words about survival of the fittest and was planning to do the same thing to him that he had to endure. The enemy began to cry and begged to be let go and spared because he wanted to live and was trying to change everything. However, the man didn't believe a word he said and had no intention of letting him go. Realizing what fate awaited him, he started to cry, calling himself a coward. Now he had pulled out a knife and was about to kill him. He began to cut him into pieces, initially wanting to do to him what he had done to the poor old man. He wanted to cut off his legs and sell him into the same life. He sliced off a piece of flesh from his legs and was planning to cook it for his enemy. But he didn't want to do that and begged him again to let him go. But even if he confessed to all his crimes and promised never to do such things again, his fate wouldn't change. Understanding this, the enemy began to weep. Still, he agreed to do what he was told. He ate his own flesh, hoping that after this, he would be set free. But it didn't work that way, as the man kept cutting. It hurt so much that he begged to be let go and was ready to do anything just to end the suffering. But Jai calmed him down, saying that losing 2 pieces of flesh wouldn't kill him. From the pain, he lost consciousness. Now, Ji approached the old man who had saved him and watched what was happening. He was terrified, thinking the hero was going to do the same thing to him. But in reality, it was nothing like that. He took him with him and was planning to save him. Together, they tried to make it to his home. But the old man understood how hard it was for him to carry him, so he begged him to just let him die. He felt ashamed to be such a burden, as he couldn't help him at all. He told the main character where his family lived and where the house was, so he carried him there. When the children and wife saw their father in such a state, they began to cry. He had lost his legs, but was still alive. The children were grateful to the rescuer who brought him back to the family, and they all bowed to him. It impressed Ji so much that he decided to turn back and ask them to stand up. He also left them some food, water, and other supplies that could be useful for a while and help them survive. Moreover, if he managed to survive, he promised to return or send someone else to help. And when he left, the man broke down in tears. He thanked his rescuer, as now he could be with his family. Meanwhile, his family began to worry about their father, as he had been gone for a long time. Feng Yun tried to explain to her daughter that he would be back soon, but she wasn't so sure about it. Suddenly, another resident of the building ran in, looking very scared. She quickly gathered everyone and led them to a safer place. Meanwhile, unknown people were trying to get inside, but the men had blocked the doors and were armed, waiting for them inside. With each blow, the force grew stronger, and soon the doors would break. They waited. Another hit even stronger than the last. Suddenly, the doors broke down. Very soon, the force that had broken them would show itself. The men tensed and were ready to open fire. But for a while, it became very quiet and nothing happened. They were prepared for the worst. Then, a strange silhouette appeared. They were monsters that they had never seen before. The mutants that entered were not like ordinary zombies. These were monsters much stronger and smarter than all the other mutants. People started shooting, trying to stop the horrifying mutants. Meanwhile, the women inside also armed themselves and prepared. They didn't know what was happening outside the doors, so they were very frightened. Feng Yun began to cry and couldn't control her emotions. She took up a weapon, because if they were to date, they would do it together in battle. After a few shots, the monsters disappeared. The men didn't want to leave the house, as they didn't know how many there were. They went out just before dawn. Now they were trying to figure out how the mutants had managed to find them. As it turned out, there was a lot of blood on the walls of the house, and the monsters had managed to reach the roof. Now they knew about their home, and there was no doubt that they would come again soon and try to attack with even greater force. Meanwhile, the main character was trying to get home. On the way, he searched houses in an attempt to find those who had survived or other valuable resources. One of those houses was his brother's, where he lived with his children. However, there was no one there. Jai went through all the rooms but found no one. Room by room, he didn't lose hope of finding living people. He peeked into every door, hoping to find at least someone. However, all his efforts were in vain. The apartment showed no signs of a struggle, no bloodstains or weapons. It was very clean. The only thing he noticed was a note on the table. It mentioned that his brother was planning to head to an island, which was their only hope for survival. This filled him with hope, as his brother might still be alive. On the wall, he saw many shared photographs. They were pictures of his family, friends, parents, and loved ones. There were also many photos of them together standing side by side. Every item in that house reminded him of his brother and the time they spent together. All these things were very familiar and dear to him, and he relived all the moments spent with him again. He found an item that was special to both of them, as it belonged to their friend who had long been gone from their side. The man almost cried, but he couldn't linger in that empty place for too long. Still, he couldn't waste so much time on this, so he just left. The next